Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, where every star hides a story. Today's adventure: what if Sirius Black raised Harry and Hermione as the heirs of his house? Before we dive in, if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the cosmos. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Rat in the Ashes. The motorbike came down out of a sky the color of a bruise, and Sirius Black already knew. He had known since the wards fell. Half a county away, drinking bad coffee in a safe house that smelled of wet wool, he had felt the Fidelius unstitch itself like a seam pulled by a careless thumb, and the mug had gone to pieces on the floor before he understood that his own hand had thrown it. The charm that hid the Potters was gone. A charm did not simply go. Someone had spoken the secret aloud, and only one living man could have done that, and it was not Sirius, and it was not Lily, and it was not James. He flew the way a man runs from a burning building, which is to say without any thought at all for how he would stop. Godric's hollow lay under the last thin light of the Day of the Dead, its lanes strung with the guttering stubs of candles nobody had thought to blow out. Children had gone door to door here a few hours ago in bedsheets and paper masks, laughing at ghosts they did not believe in. The church clock said a little past 9. From the top of the lane he could see the cottage, and even from there he could see that the top of it was wrong, that the roof had opened like a struck egg, that a whole corner of the house had been unmade and lay in the garden as timber and slate and the pale ribs of the rafters. He did not remember landing. He remembered the gate because the gate would not open, and he tore it off its hinge with a strength he did not own on any ordinary day, and then he was on the path where James had grown roses because Lily liked them and James liked Lily. The front door hung inward on one screw. Inside, the hall was full of a fine gray snow of plaster still drifting down, and the air had the flat mineral taste of magic that had been spent all at once and to no purpose. Sirius went in with his wand up and his mouth already open around a name. James was at the foot of the stairs. He had fallen the way a man falls when nothing in him is holding him up any more, one arm flung out across the boards, his glasses knocked a yard off and lying with one lens starred, and his wand was not in his hand. That was the thing Sirius would carry for the rest of his life and never once set down. The wand was not in his hand. James had gone up empty-handed. James had heard the door and had put himself between it and the stairs with nothing but his voice, buying seconds, and Sirius knew without being told that the last of those seconds had been spent shouting for Lily to run. He knelt. He touched his friend's shoulder and turned him gently, the way you turn a sleeper you don't want to wake, and there was nothing to wake. The face was unmarked. That was the cruelty of the green. It left the house in ruins and the man without a mark on him, so that some idiot part of Sirius kept waiting for the chest to rise. He did not weep. That would come later, and it would nearly finish him. Just then his whole body had narrowed to a single filament of listening, because over his head, muffled by a floor, a baby was crying. He went up the stairs 3 at a time. The nursery door was blown off. The far wall was gone, and through the gap the cold October night looked in at the wreck of a room that somebody had painted, not long ago, with charmed stags that were meant to leap along the skirting and a moon that had once glowed at bedtime and now hung dead and gray. Lily was on the floor beneath the window. She had put herself there. Sirius understood the geometry of it in one glance and hated that he understood it. She had put her body between the door and the cot, and she had not moved from that spot, not for anything, not for her own life, and whatever had come through the door had had to go past her to reach the child, and she had made it kill her first. The cot still stood, and in the cot, red-faced, furious, alive, stood Harry. He had hauled himself up by the bars, and he was howling with the whole outraged strength of a 1-year-old who has been left too long in the dark, and there was blood on his face, a thin line of it drawn down from the hairline over the brow in a shape that made no sense, a cut like a rune, like a letter in an alphabet Sirius did not want to be able to read. But he was standing, he was screaming. The green that had unmade the house and taken James and taken Lily had come to the last small thing in the room and had impossibly broken against it. "All right," Sirius heard himself say from very far away in a voice pitched for a frightened animal. All right, Pronkslet, I've got you, I've got you." He lifted the child out of the cot, and the child fought him for a second, blind with fear, small fists battering, and then some older knowledge under the fear caught up, and Harry fisted both hands in the front of Sirius's robes and pressed his wet face into Sirius's neck and held on with the strength of the drowning. Sirius stood in the ruin of the room with James's sun burrowing into his collarbone, and he put one hand flat against the child's heaving back, and he did not weep, and he did not weep, and he did not weep. Somewhere below, the front door scraped. He turned with the baby held to his chest and his wand up in murder in his throat. "It's me," said a voice like a landslide trying to be gentle. "It's only me, Sirius, put it down, it's Hagrid, don't." Hagrid filled the ruined doorway with his hair full of plaster and his enormous face wet and shining, and behind him the stairwell was suddenly bright with the sweep of a lamp charm. Sirius lowered the wand a hand's breadth and no further. "Dumbledore sent me," Hagrid said. "Fur Harry, I'm to bring him. He said summat's happened, he had one o' them instruments start screamin', and he sent me straight off and Sirius." The great man's gaze went past him to the shape beneath the window, and his face came apart. "Oh, Lily, oh no, 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 don't look," Sirius said. His voice did not sound like his own. "Hagrid, don't look at her, cover her, do that for me, cover her, and don't let anyone up here who isn't ordered, do you hear?" Hagrid nodded and could not speak, and fumbled his own vast coat off his shoulders, and that was a mercy, because it gave the man something to do with his hands, and it turned his terrible weeping face away. Sirius carried Harry to the far corner, away from the gap in the wall and the cold coming through it, and he crouched with his back to the room so the child would see nothing but the intact wall, and he made himself think it was Peter. He arrived at it the way you arrive at the bottom of a stair in the dark, the foot coming down hard on ground that isn't where you thought it was. Only 3 people alive had been able to give up this house. James would have died first and had. Lily would have died first and had. And Peter Pettigrew, who had wept with gratitude a week ago when they made him secret keeper instead of Sirius, who had said in his soft, wet voice that he was not worthy of the trust, who had been right about that in a way none of them had understood. Peter had walked up to the Dark Lord and opened his mouth and given his friends away for whatever a rat is paid. It had been Sirius's idea to make Peter the keeper. Sirius's own clever idea, the bluff inside the bluff. Everyone would hunt Sirius, the obvious choice, the best friend, and never think to touch fat, harmless, forgettable Peter. He had talked James into it. He had been so pleased with himself. The knowledge went into him like a blade going in slow, and on the other side of it, waiting, cold and clean and almost sweet, was the thing that would have ended everything. He could put the child down. He could put Harry into Hagrid's arms this instant and take the bike and go, and he knew where Peter would run, knew the bolt holes in the safe streets, knew Peter's habits the way you know a brother's, and he could be on him before the man had finished being pleased with himself. He could have Peter's throat in an hour. Every nerve in Sirius's body was already leaning toward the door, toward the bike, toward the black joy of it. Harry's fist tightened in his collar. The child had stopped screaming. He had subsided into the deep, shuddering hiccups of a baby who has cried past the end of crying, and he had gone heavy and slack against Sirius the way children go when they finally believe someone has them, and he had put his thumb in his mouth, and his eyes, when Sirius looked down, were open. Green eyes, Lily's exact green, gone glassy and enormous with exhaustion, looking up at Sirius out of James's face, waiting to see what the world was going to do next. "He needs me," Sirius said aloud, and understood that this was the true thing, and that the bike and the bolt holes in Peter's throat were the false thing, the seductive thing, the door that opened onto a black corridor with nothing at the end of it. If he went after Peter tonight, he would very possibly die, or worse, he would kill Peter in a street with witnesses and no proof and hang for it, and either way there would be no one for this child but strangers and the dark. Peter had already taken James. Peter had already taken Lily. Sirius would be cursed before he let Peter take the rest of the night, the rest of Harry, the whole of what was left. Let someone else have the rat. "Hagrid," he said, and his voice had changed. It had a floor under it now. "Listen to me. I need you to send word to Dumbledore tonight before anything. Tell him it wasn't me. Tell him we switched. James made me secret keeper on paper and we told no one, and then at the last we switched it to Peter Pettigrew in secret because I thought I'd be the one they came for and Peter would be safe. It was my idea. Tell Dumbledore that, and tell him Peter did this. Peter's the traitor. He'll run and he's cleverer than he looks, and he'll try to make it look like something else, so they have to move tonight. Tell them Mad-Eye, tell them to put Moody on it. Moody won't be fooled. Can you carry all that?" Hagrid, who had been about to argue about the child, stopped with his mouth open. Something in Sirius's face made him nod instead. "I can carry it," he said, word for word. "But Sirius, Dumbledore said young Harry's come to. I know what Dumbledore wants." Sirius stood, the baby against his shoulder, and there was iron in him now that had not been there 10 minutes ago and would never entirely leave him again. "And Dumbledore can say it to my face. I'm his godfather, Hagrid. James and Lily named me. It's written and it's witnessed, and there's magic in it older than any instrument in that office. Harry stays with me tonight. Anyone who wants to take him goes through me first, and I'm not in the mood to be gone through." "There's no need for anyone to go through anyone," said a new voice, quiet from the stairs. Albus Dumbledore came up into the ruin with his lamplight going before him, and for a moment he was only an old man in a traveling cloak looking at the body of a woman he had taught to read a spell, and his face in the lamplight was that of a man 100 years old and every year of it landing at once. Then he saw the child on Sirius's shoulder, alive, and something moved behind his eyes that was not relief and was not grief but was made of both. "He lives," Dumbledore said softly. "He lives," Sirius agreed. He did not lower his guard. Lily put herself in front of him. Whatever came off it, she made it. She's why he's breathing. "Yes," Dumbledore murmured, and he looked at Lily for a long moment with his hat in his hands, and then he looked at the mark on Harry's brow, and Sirius watched the old man reading it the way Sirius had refused to, and watched the old man arrive somewhere Sirius could not follow. "Yes, I believe she is, and more than she knew." Behind Dumbledore, boots on the stair, Minerva McGonagall came up in a tartan dressing gown thrown over her nightdress, her hair down her back, a woman who had left her house without stopping to be a professor, and when she saw the room she put her hand over her mouth and made a sound Sirius had never heard from her and hoped never to hear again. "Albus," she said when she could. "Albus, they said in the village, they're already saying he's gone, you know who, that he came here and he's—" "So it appears," said Dumbledore, and she could not say it. She was looking at Sirius at the bundle on his shoulder. "The child, is he?" "He's fine," Sirius said. "He's tired and he's frightened and he wants his mum and he can't have her, but he's fine, he's whole, he's mine to keep safe and I'm keeping him." He heard how it came out, raw and challenging, aimed at two people who had done him no wrong, and he could not help it. His arms had closed around the child without instruction from him and would not open. Dumbledore regarded him. In the lamplight the old man's eyes were very blue and very steady, and Sirius realized, very tired of grief. He had been burying his own for a long time, and here was a fresh grave dug on top of all the others. "Sirius," he said, "I am going to tell you what I intended, and I am going to tell you why, and then we are going to talk about it like men and not shout it like boys, because there is a sleeping child between us and neither of us wishes to be the one who wakes him. When my instruments told me the Fidelius had broken, I feared exactly what I have found. I sent Hagrid ahead. And I had made some time ago a provision for this night that I hoped never to use, that if the worst came, Harry should go to his mother's sister, to her blood. There is a protection in that, an old magic, the magic of the sacrifice Lily has just made, which will hold and root and shelter him if he grows where her blood grows. It is not a warm answer, I know, Petunia Dursley. It is a safe one." "It's a cupboard," Sirius said. The words came out of him before he had them, and he did not know entirely where they came from, only that he had met Petunia Evans exactly twice, and both times had come away understanding precisely how much room there would be in that house for a boy who did magic. "It's a locked door and a woman who hated her sister for being what this baby is. You want to give James and Lily's son to a house that will teach him to be ashamed of them. Over my body, Albus, over my actual body. I'll lie down in this door, the protection, then find me another one." Sirius stepped forward and the child stirred and settled, and he lowered his voice for the child's sake, and it came out harder for being lowered. "Find me another protection. I know you can. There's no wizard alive who knows more old magic than you, and you'll stand in this room and tell me the only thing you've got is a Muggle woman's spare bedroom. Blood magic. There's blood magic in godfatherhood too, older than the ministry, older than the statute. James and Lily didn't choose Petunia, they chose me. When they made me his godfather, they cut their palms and I cut mine, and we bound it, the three of us, over him the night he was christened. It's in him, it's in me. You want protection sealed in blood and love freely given. It's already done, Albus, it's already there. You're offering me a hedge and I'm telling you there's a wall." The room was very quiet. Plaster dust turned in the lamplight. Somewhere far off a dog was barking at nothing or at everything. McGonagall said into the silence, "Albus, he's right about the woman." Her voice shook and steadied. "I forgive me, I watched that house for a day once, years ago. Don't ask me why I had a feeling. They are the worst sort of muggles, not cruel with their hands perhaps, cruel with their smallness. They would make him ordinary if it killed the both of them, and it would half kill him." Dumbledore did not answer at once. He walked to the window, past Lily, careful of her, and looked out at the broken garden and the candle stubs and the sleeping gate Sirius had torn off, and the whole of his long back said that he was carrying more than any of them could see and choosing now what to set down. "There is the matter," he said at last, without turning, "that you are, as of tonight, the most hunted man in Britain." Sirius went still. "You do not know it yet," Dumbledore went on, gently, still to the window, "but you will. By morning the country will know that the Potters were betrayed, and the country will know that you were their secret keeper, because that is what is written at the ministry, Sirius. On paper you are the man who gave them up. Peter Pettigrew is a private arrangement whispered in a cottage between three friends, two of whom are dead. When the Aurors come, and they will come, tonight or tomorrow, they will come for you, and they will find you holding the child of the people you are accused of killing. Do you understand the shape of it? Do you understand how it looks?" The floor came out from under Sirius a second time. He had not thought of it. He had been so full of Peter that he had not once thought of the trap Peter had built around him without lifting a finger, the perfect frame, the secret keeper of records standing over the bodies. "Then it's a good thing," he said slowly, "that I told Hagrid to fetch Moody before I told him anything else. And it's a good thing you're standing in this room, because you believe me, don't you? You looked at Harry's forehead and you looked at me, and somewhere in that head of yours you already know I'm telling you the truth." Dumbledore turned. He looked at Sirius for a long moment, and then he did something Sirius would remember. He inclined his head the smallest fraction, the way one duelist salutes another before the first cast. "I believe you," he said. "For what it is worth tonight, which may be little and may be everything, I believe you. Which is precisely why I will not let you run, and I will not let you hide, and I will not let you go anywhere near Peter Pettigrew. You will do the hardest thing, Sirius Black, the thing your whole reckless heart will scream against. You will stand still. You will let yourself be arrested. You will hand your wand to the Aurors and let them take you in, and you will trust." The old man's voice roughened. "You will trust me to prove what I believe. Because a man who runs is a man who is guilty, and a man who stands is a man who can be saved, and I have buried enough of my students this year." I will not add you to them, and I will not have that child raised by a fugitive in a hole. Do you hear me? Stand still, let it come, and live. And Peter walks, and Peter, said a fourth voice from the stairs, grinding uneven, does not walk anywhere on account of Peter having a leg that's presently a great deal shorter than it used to be. Alastor Moody came up out of the dark like a piece of the dark that had decided to have opinions, his wooden leg clocking on the ruined boards, his coat singed along one side, and over his shoulder, held by the scruff in one gnarled fist and struggling, was a rat. Not a rat that was too large and too silver-gray at the muzzle, and that had, where an ordinary rat has a foot, a paw that was missing a toe. Caught him coming out of a sewer grate on the Muggle High Street in Godric's Hollow, Moody growled. His magical eye spun to Dumbledore, to Sirius, to the child, to Lily, and stopped there, and even Mad Eye's ruined face changed. Common back, he said more quietly. Common back to make sure of his work, I'd wager, or common back for something. Little coward tried to bring a whole street down when I put a stunner past his ear, blew the gas main, would have killed a dozen muggles and left nothing of himself but a finger for them to bury, and oh, I know that trick, Pettigrew, I invented half of it. Didn't let him finish. Got his transformation caught halfway when the second stunner hit. Been a rat with a man's guilty eyes ever since. The rat in his fist had gone very still. Sirius crossed the room before anyone could stop him, the child on his shoulder, and stood over the thing that had been his friend, and looked into the wet, frightened eyes, and every muscle he owned told him to reach out. He did not reach out. Harry's breath was warm against his neck, slow now, the breath of a child asleep. That was the wall Dumbledore had failed to understand, and Sirius had only that night learned to build. On the other side of it was Peter's throat and a black corridor with nothing at the end of it. On this side of it was a sleeping child who would need tomorrow and the day after that, and for 11,000 days after that, someone whose hands were clean and whose freedom was intact and who had chosen, when the choosing cost the most, to stay. "Hello, Peter," Sirius said softly. "You're going to want to change back now. Because if you change back in front of Alastor Moody and Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall, then everyone in this room is a witness, and there's no gas main clever enough to unmake 3 witnesses. You change back and you talk, and you tell them what you did, and you tell them who made who's secret keeper, and I'll tell you why you'll do it." He crouched so that his face was very close to the rat's, and his voice never rose. "Because if you don't, they'll put you in a cell to think about it, and one day, Peter, one day when you least expect it, you'll turn around and I'll be standing there, and I've got nothing but time. I've got the rest of my life, and I'm going to spend it happy in a warm house with this boy, because you couldn't take that too. Now change back." The rat began to grow. It was not a pleasant thing to watch, a man unfolding out of a rat, the fur going in and the pink hairless tail becoming a spine, and at the end of it Peter Pettigrew knelt on the ruined floor of the nursery in torn robes, shaking, one hand pressed to a leg that Moody's curse had left crooked, and he did not look at Lily, and he did not look at James through the floor, and he could not look at Sirius. He looked at Dumbledore because Dumbledore was the only person in the room who had never once frightened him and never once needed to. "He'd have killed me," Peter whispered. You don't know what he was at the end. None of you fought him like he'd have killed me, Sirius. He'd have. What could I do? What could any of us? Die, Sirius said. Like they did. It was on the table for all of us. James took it. Lily took it. You had exactly the same offer, and you're the only one of the 4 of us who's still breathing, so don't you dare stand in the room where she died and tell me you had no choice. That will do, said Dumbledore, and it was not loud, but the room obeyed it. Alastor. Bind him and take him, and let no fewer than 3 sworn Aurors have eyes on him at every hour until the Wisengamot sits, and if he so much as twitches toward a rat's shape, you have my leave to remind him what a stunner feels like. Minerva, the Longbottoms must be warned and the order roused. If Voldemort is truly gone, there will be others tonight who do not yet know they are safe, and others still who will decide tonight that they never were. Go, both of you, I will see to what is here. They went. Moody clocked away down the stairs with Peter bound before him at wand point, weeping, and the sound of the weeping went down and out into the dead candle night and was gone, and the nursery was quiet, and there were only the 3 of them left. An old man, a young man, a sleeping child, and beneath the window a woman who had made the whole thing possible by refusing to step aside. You did the hardest thing, Dumbledore said quietly, twice. First when you did not put him down and go after Peter, and again just now when you did not close your hand. I have known great wizards who could not have done either. You may not feel it tonight, but you have already been more of a father to that child than most men manage in years. Sirius looked down at Harry. The child had gone entirely limp with sleep, his mouth open against Sirius's collar, one small hand still fisted in the cloth, as though even asleep he had decided not to risk letting go. Where do I take him? Sirius asked. It came out smaller than he meant. I've a house. It's the worst house in England. It's my mother's house, and it's full of my mother, alive and dead, and there's a portrait of her in the hall that screams, and a mad old elf, and every wall of it is painted with everything I ran away from when I was 16. I swore I'd never sleep under that roof again. He laughed, and there was no laughter in it, and it's the safest place I own. The wards on it would break a battering charm. My family were terrible people, Albus, but they were terrible people who built to last. Then take him there, Dumbledore said gently, tonight, because tonight you need walls that hold, and then Sirius make it a different house. You have spent your life fleeing that place. You are not 16 and you are not running. You are a man carrying a son. Walk in the front door and take the house away from the dead. It is yours now. Make it something they would have hated. That, I think, would be the truest revenge available to you, and the only kind worth taking. Sirius said nothing. His arms had tightened again without instruction. Dumbledore crossed the ruined room, and he stopped by the window, and he knelt, an old man's careful folding down, beside Lily Potter. He was quiet for a while. Then he drew his wand, and with a tenderness that had nothing of magic's usual flourish in it, he covered her over, and did the same below for James, so that when the others came in the gray morning they would find the two of them decently kept and not sprawled for strangers to gawp at. He rose, he looked at the child once more. Her protection is in him, he said, half to himself. I felt sure it would need her blood to hold, and perhaps it would for the particular shape of danger I feared. But there is more than one old magic in the world, Sirius, and more than one way a love can root itself in a child. You spoke of a binding sealed in blood at his christening. I had forgotten it. Do not let anyone tell you in the years to come that you are the second best thing that could have happened to this boy. You will hear it said. It will not be true. He was gone before Sirius could answer, down the stairs and out into the night, and the crack of his disapparition came a moment later from the broken garden. Sirius stood alone in the room a while longer. He did not want to be the last to leave, and he could not make himself go, and in the end it was Harry who decided it, turning his face against Sirius's throat and making a dreaming sound of complaint at the cold coming through the gap in the wall. That was enough. That would always from now on be enough. Come on then, Pronkslet, Sirius murmured. Let's get you warm, I know a house. He went down past the place where James had fallen, and he stopped there, and he crouched with the child, and he picked James's cracked glasses up off the floor and folded them and put them in his own breast pocket over his heart where they would stay. He did not have words. He and James had never needed many. He put his hand flat on the cold boards for a moment, the way you press a hand to a shoulder, and then he stood, because the living cannot stay with the dead, because there was a boy to carry out of the dark. The bike started first time. Sirius had charmed the sidecar warm and soft years ago for James, who had liked to be flown and would never admit it, and now he laid Harry down in it wrapped in Hagrid's abandoned coat and cast the sticking charm and the warming charm and a cushioning charm besides, 3 of them, checking each one twice because he was already, without noticing the exact moment it had happened, a man who checked twice. They rose over Godric's hollow. Below, the candle stubs had almost all gone out, and the church clock struck the quarter, and somewhere a woman came to a lit door and looked up at the sound of the engine and did not see them, because Sirius had thought to make the bike unseeable before he ever left the ground. He had already begun to think like a man with something to lose. He flew low and slow, which he had never in his life done on this machine that had been built for reckless boys to frighten themselves on over the tops of clouds. He kept beneath the weather. He took the long way, the safe way, the way that added an hour and shed no altitude worth losing, and every few minutes he leaned down and put 2 fingers to the bundle in the sidecar to feel it rise and fall. Once over the black shoulder of the downs, Harry woke and looked up past the man at the wheeling stars and did not cry, only watched them, and Sirius watched him watch, and thought about how the whole of the House of Black had named its children for those same stars for 4 centuries and had not managed in all that time to teach a single one of them to simply look up and be glad of the light. He thought he might teach this one. He thought it might be the only lesson he was truly qualified to give. London came up under them gold and orange and endless. Sirius brought the bike down in the black slot of a square that no Muggle had ever properly counted the houses of, and number 12 unfolded itself between its neighbors the way it always had, swelling out of nowhere with its blistered door and its serpent knocker and its air of a house that has been holding a grudge for 200 years. He carried Harry up the steps. The child woke halfway and looked around with the drowsy solemnity of the very young, taking in the dead house and the swollen door and the man carrying him, and decided on the evidence to keep hold of the man. Sirius put his hand to the door, and the wards read his blood and did not like it exactly, but knew it and let him in. The hall was as he had left it at 16 and worse for the years, the troll's leg umbrella stand. The blackened heads of dead house elves mounted along the stair like a row of grim little trophies, the long moth-eaten runner, and the curtains, the heavy velvet curtains at the top of the hall, behind which he knew, with the sick certainty of a boy who has been screamed awake 1,000 times, his mother was waiting. Creature came shuffling out of the dark under the stairs, muttering ancient, his snout of a nose twitching, and when he saw Sirius he stopped, and his great pale eyes filled with a loathing so pure it was almost admirable. Blood traitor, the elf breathed, comes back. Comes back to the noble house of my mistress, filth, ungrateful filth, and the eyes fixed on the bundle in Sirius's arms and went wide, and brings a half-blood brat into the house of Black. Oh, my mistress, my poor mistress, if she could see, if she could see. The curtains at the top of the hall tore themselves open. The portrait of Walburga Black filled its frame the way a storm fills a sky, and she drew breath to scream, and Sirius, standing in the hall of his nightmares with the son of his best friend held against his chest, did the thing he had never once done in all the years she had screamed at him. He did not flinch, and he did not shout back, and he did not run up the stairs two at a time to slam a door she would only open with a word. He walked to the foot of the portrait, and he looked up at his mother's painted face, and he waited for her to finish. "Stain of dishonor," she was shrieking. "Betrayer of your fathers, what is that? What have you brought into my house? Get it out, get it out." "It's a baby, mother," Sirius said when she paused to breathe. His voice was quiet, and it was steady, and it carried down the hall like a blade laid flat on a table. "His name is Harry. His father was the finest man I ever knew, and his mother was worth 10 of everyone whose name is stitched on your precious tapestry. And I am going to raise him in this house, your house, and I am going to make him kind, and I am going to make him happy, and there is not one single thing you can do about it, because you are dead, mother, and I am not, and the house is mine." She screamed. Of course she screamed. It was the only note she had. But Sirius had already turned his back on her, which he had never done, not once in all his childhood, and he carried Harry past the row of severed elf heads and up the stairs, and the screaming followed them, and then behind them choked itself off as the child, jostled by the climb, began to grizzle, and Sirius bent his head and murmured nonsense to him, and did not so much as glance back. He put Harry to sleep that night in his own old bedroom, the one he had papered at 15 with everything that would infuriate his family, and had left up in permanent, spelled-fast defiance, so that James's son fell asleep beneath posters of Muggle motorcycles, and a Gryffindor banner, and photographs of 4 laughing boys who had thought themselves immortal. Sirius conjured a cot and warded it 3 times and sat on the floor beside it with his back against the bed, and he watched the child sleep, and at last, in the small hours, with no one to see, in a dead house that hated him, he let himself weep for James and for Lily and for Peter as he had been before he was what he became, and for the whole broken evening of the world. When it was done, he wiped his face on his sleeve, and he did not feel better exactly, but he felt emptied, and into the empty place something else began, very quietly, to move in. Harry slept on. Once he stirred and reached out in his sleep, a small hand opening and closing on nothing, and Sirius gave him a finger to hold, and the child gripped it and settled, and Sirius stayed there like that, one finger held prisoner by a sleeping boy, until the light came gray through the curtains he had never taken down. At some point in the worst of the dark, he heard the scuff of the elf on the landing. Creature had come up the stairs and stopped outside the open door and stood there in the shadow with his lamp-like eyes, watching the intruder in his mistress's house, and Sirius did not turn his head. He said only into the quiet, "His name is Harry, and he is going to live here, and you are not going to touch him, and you are not going to frighten him, and that is the whole of what I require of you tonight." The elf muttered something venomous about mudbloods and stains and half-bloods in the beds of the noble and most ancient, and shuffled away, and Sirius let him go. There would be years to fight that particular war, and he found he did not have the heart for the first battle of it before sunrise. The elf had loved exactly one member of this family in 100 years, and that one was dead, and Sirius did not yet understand what that fact would come to be worth to all of them. He let Creature go and turned back to the cot, and the small hand had not let go of his finger. He made 3 promises before dawn, and he made them silently, and he kept every one. The first was that he would clear his name, not for pride, but so that no one could ever come in the night and take the child away on a technicality of paper. The second was that Peter would answer for it in a court in the light by the law, and that Sirius would sit in that court with clean hands and watch it done and not soil himself with it. And the third, the one he made last and meant most, watching the child breathe. That Harry Potter would grow up knowing exactly who he was and exactly who had loved him, in a warm house full of people who had chosen him, and that whatever the House of Black had been for 400 years, whatever cruelty was stitched into its tapestry and screamed from its walls, this child and any child Sirius was ever lucky enough to gather in would be its heir now, and the house would learn, whether it liked it or not, to mean something new. Downstairs, faint and impotent behind her torn-open curtains, his mother was still screaming at the dark. Sirius Black closed his eyes and did not hear her, and held on to the small hand that held his, and for the first time in that whole long murdering night, the house was, in the one room that mattered, quiet. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Blackthorn the Wisengamot met in the deepest of the ministry's courtrooms, a stone pit ringed with tiers of plum-robed witches and wizards, and Sirius Black sat in the chain chair at the bottom of it and did not let them chain him. That had been the negotiation, conducted over 3 weeks by a small, ferocious solicitor named Tiberius Ogden, and by Albus Dumbledore's simple refusal to leave the building. That the accused would come to court unbound, because a man Dumbledore had personally vouched for would not be paraded in irons for the prophet to photograph. Sirius had spent those 3 weeks not in a cell but under house arrest at Grimmauld Place with 2 Aurors on the step and a tracking charm on his wand, and he had spent them learning to change nappies and to warm milk to precisely the heat a 15-month-old would accept in no other, and he had discovered that a man could be terrified for his freedom and bored out of his skull at the same time, provided the boredom involved a teething child at 4 in the morning. Now he sat in the chair and watched them bring in Peter. Peter came shuffling between 2 Aurors with his legs still crooked from Moody's curse and his eyes going everywhere but the tears, and when the manacles fastened over his wrists he flinched at the cold of them, and Sirius watched a man he had loved for 10 years flinch at a cold that James would never feel again and said nothing. Barty Crouch conducted it himself from the great carved chair, his voice like a door closing. 3 drops of Veritasrum on Peter's grey tongue. The questions, flat and terrible and unanswerable. Were you the secret keeper of the Fidelius charm concealing the house of James and Lily Potter at Godric's Hollow? Yes, said Peter in a voice gone smooth and far away. Did Sirius Black hold that office before you? On the paper at the ministry, not in truth. We changed it. Sirius made me keeper in secret a week before the end. He said no one would ever suspect me. A thin high sound came out of the smooth face, half a laugh. He was right, no one did. And did you carry the secret of that house to Lord Voldemort of your own will? The tears 400 witches and wizards did not breathe. Yes, said Peter Pettigrew. I told him where they were. I was afraid. I have always been afraid. It is the only thing I have ever been very good at. Sirius did not move in the chair. He had thought this moment would taste of something. He had built it in the dark of Grimmauld for 3 weeks, the vindication, the faces turning, and now that it came it tasted of nothing at all, because none of it gave anything back. Peter's yes did not open the door of the cottage and let James walk out of it. It only proved, to a room full of strangers, a thing that Sirius had known standing over his friend's body with his own son screaming in the next room. He looked at Peter once, and Peter, drugged past the ability to look away, looked back, and there was nothing left between them to say, and so neither of them said it. They cleared him in 11 minutes. Barty Crouch pronounced it in the same closing door voice with which he had condemned a dozen others that winter, and somewhere in the plum tears there was a stir and a rustle that in a warmer room might have been applause, and Dumbledore, high in the visitors' gallery, inclined his head the same fraction he had inclined it in the ruined nursery. Sirius stood out of the chair that had not chained him and walked up out of the pit, and at the top of the stairs, in a side room with a charmed window that showed a sky it did not have, Andromeda Tonks was waiting with Harry on her hip. Well, she said. Free, Sirius said. The word came out strange, cleared, innocent, all of it. Andromeda Black, who had been blasted off the family tapestry at 19 for marrying a Muggle-born man, and had never once regretted the loss of a family that would char her name off a wall for love, looked at her cousin for a moment with her dark black eyes, so like his, so like the eyes of everyone who had ever hurt either of them. And then she crossed the room and put the baby into his arms without ceremony. Which was the only welcome Andromeda ever gave and worth more than an hour of anyone else's. Good, she said. Then you can change the next one. He's been saving it for you. Harry, delighted to be returned to the tall, loud one who smelled of home, seized a fistful of Sirius's hair and pulled, and Sirius, freed of every charge the wizarding world could bring against him, stood in a windowless ministry room and let a 1.5-year-old haul him about by the hair, and thought that he had never in his life been so glad to be hurt. The custody was a quieter business and in its way a harder one. The ministry did not know what to do with him. There was no precedent for it, or rather there was, and the precedent all ran the wrong way. Godfathers of magical children were guardians of last resort, and the resort of first instance was blood, and Harry had blood, an aunt in Surrey with a legal claim and a spare bedroom, and the file noted no wish whatsoever to exercise the claim. It was Dumbledore in the end who settled it, and he did it not by fighting the blood magic argument, but by conceding it and turning it. The protection I feared he would need, the old man told the small hearing, was a protection against a danger that no longer exists. The one who marked the child is gone. What the child needs now is not a fortress of blood but a home of love, and I have watched, this winter, a man learn to be a father in a house that fought him at every turn, and I have seen the old magic answer him. He looked at Sirius. There is a binding in godfatherhood, sealed at the christening, older than this ministry. It has already taken root. I will not stand in a courtroom and tell a court that the law knows better than the magic. Give the child to Sirius Black. I will stake what remains of my judgment on it, and I have not in a long life staked it carelessly. And so it was done, with a quill and a seal and a drop of Sirius's blood on parchment that flared briefly gold when it touched, which the clerk had not expected and could not explain and wrote down anyway. Sirius Black, lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, guardian in law and in magic of Harry James Potter. He walked out of the ministry that afternoon with his godson asleep on his shoulder and his name clean and his family's fortune, untouched through all the years he had refused to spend a nut of it, sitting in the vaults at Gringotts waiting to be turned to some purpose its makers would have loathed. He knew at once what the purpose was. He would not raise Harry at Grimmauld Place. He tried. He wanted it understood in the ledger he kept in his own head that he had tried. For a season he lived in the house of his mother and made war on it. He took down the row of severed elf heads from the stair, all of them, and gave them a proper burial in the back garden that made Creature weep with rage. He scrubbed the drawing room. He let light into rooms that had not seen it since before he was born. And every morning the house grew back a little of what he had cut away in the night, the tarnish creeping back over the silver, the doxies breeding in the curtains faster than he could smoke them out, his mother's portrait learning new insults for the child, and Sirius stood one gray afternoon in the dim hall with Harry beginning to talk now, beginning to say words, and watched Harry point up at the screaming portrait and open his mouth to copy it, and knew that he was losing. You could not make a home out of a haunting, you could only be haunted in it. So he went one wet spring day to the small door at the back of the Gringotts vault, the one the goblins had shown his father and his father's father, and behind it he found the deed box of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, and in the deed box, among a dozen properties gone to ruin or sold or forgotten, he found the one he had been half remembering for weeks. A hall on the edge of the moors in the west country, unentailed, unlet, sitting empty behind its own wards since his great-uncle Marius had died in it alone. Blackthorn Hall, a grim enough name, but the Blacks named everything grimly. It meant nothing but the hedge of thorn that grew wild along the western wall, the sloe that flowered white and early, and turned the whole hillside to something you would drive miles to see. Sirius took Harry to see it on a morning in April when the blackthorn was in flower. The house sat low and long and gray on a shoulder of the moor, its chimneys down, its windows shuttered, its gardens gone entirely to bracken and gorse, and it should have been a melancholy sight, and somehow was not. The wards, when Sirius set his bleeding thumb to the gate-post, did not resist him the way Grimmaulds did, sullen and grudging. They woke under his hand and turned over like a great animal shifting in sleep, and read his blood and knew it, and something ran through the whole gray pile of the house from cellar to chimney that Sirius felt in his own teeth, an old attention swinging toward him. The House of Black had more than one house. And the magic in this one had been sleeping a long time, and it was glad, in the wordless way of old magic, to be woken by a Black who came to it carrying a child. "Ah," Harry said from Sirius's arms and pointed with a fat certain finger at the flowering blackthorn along the western wall, the white of it against the gray, and Sirius did not know whether the child meant the flowers or was reaching, as he still did 20 times a day, for the woman who was not coming, and he could not ask, and so he did the only thing there was to do. He carried the child down the overgrown path to the white hedge and let him touch the flowers. "That's blackthorn," he said. "It's ours. All of this is ours now. We're going to live here. What do you think?" Harry seized a spray of the white flowers and crushed it happily and put it in his mouth, and Sirius fished it out again, and that, more or less, was the decision made. It took a year to make the hall fit to live in, and Sirius did not do it with the flick of a wand, though he could have paid to have it done that way in a week. He did it slowly, room by room, with his own hands as often as his own magic, because he had discovered a thing about himself that would have astonished the reckless boy he had been, that he liked the work. He liked stripping the shutters and finding good oak under 200 years of grime. He liked the way a house gave back exactly what you put into it and never once screamed at you for it. Remus came at the weekends, and then, when the weekends were not enough, came to stay, because Remus Lupin in that spring of 1982 was a man the wizarding world had no use for, a werewolf with 3 NEWTs more than anyone hiring would ever look at, and Blackthorn Hall had rooms enough and a cellar deep enough and a friend who did not care what he became one night a month. They built Harry's first real bedroom together, Sirius and Remus, in a corner room that caught the morning, and Sirius charmed the ceiling of it, which was the one piece of proper wandwork he lavished on the place, so that it showed the sky over the moor as it truly was, the real weather, the real stars, and at night the real constellations wheeled slowly over the sleeping boy, and among them, low in the south in winter, the brightest star in the whole sky, which Sirius did not name for the child until the child was old enough to ask, and then answered simply that it was the dog's star, and that it had been keeping an eye on him since before he was born. Andromeda came with Ted and with Nymphadora, who was 5 that year and could already, on a good day, turn her nose into a duck's bill and hold it long enough to make Harry shriek with joy. Ted Tonks, a broad, cheerful man who had grown up Muggle-born and poor, and had built a good life out of nothing but his own hands and his wife's fierce love, looked at the half-restored hall and at the Black Lord on his knees sanding a windowsill and said, "You know, when Dromeda told me her cousin was a Black Lord, I pictured somebody rather more terrible." And Sirius said, "Give it time," and Ted laughed, and it was the first time laughter had gone all the way up to the rafters of Blackthorn Hall in 100 years, and the house seemed to Sirius to take it in and keep it, the way a cold room keeps the warmth of a lit fire long after. The full moons were the private architecture of that first year, the beams no visitor saw. Remus spent them in the deep cellar Sirius had cleared and warded and softened with old blankets, and Sirius spent them there with him, not as a man but as the great black dog he could become, because a werewolf with company that the wolf reads as pack does not tear at itself the way a werewolf alone will. They had worked this out at 17 and had never stopped. So one night a month, while Harry slept 2 floors up beneath his charmed and wheeling stars, a dog the size of a small pony lay in a warded cellar with its spine against the flank of a wolf, and kept it from the worst of itself. And in the morning Remus came up the stairs gray and hollow and gentle, and Sirius put a mug of tea in his hands and did not make a thing of it, because the not making a thing of it was the whole of the gift. Harry knew only that Uncle Mooney was sometimes poorly and needed quiet, and that on those mornings you brought him the good biscuits and did not climb on him, and he obeyed this with the solemn tenderness of a child who has been taught that people you love have weather in them, and that you do not blame the sky for its rain. Nymphadora renamed herself roughly twice a year and answered to none of it, so they settled on Tonks the way you settle on a nickname for a comet, and she came to Blackthorn on school holidays trailing changed hair and changed noses and a great appetite for making Harry laugh until he fell over. She was 7 years older, which at those ages is a canyon, and she crossed it every visit without appearing to notice it was there, teaching him to skim flat stones across the horse pond and to say rude words in 3 languages that Sirius pretended not to hear and Remus pretended not to have taught her. Ted brought sausages and a wireless and an inexhaustible fund of Muggle card tricks that baffled a house full of wizards. And Andromeda, who did not do warmth the way other people did it, who did it instead in the language of blunt competence, took over the kitchen garden that first spring and made it feed them, and taught Harry the names of things that grew, and once, only once, standing in the wrecked orchard with her cousin while the children shrieked somewhere out of sight, said, "You've done a thing here, Sirius, do you know that? You've taken the worst word in the world, black, and you've started to make it mean a place children run toward." She had not looked at him when she said it. Andromeda never looked at you for the true things, but she had said it, and Sirius carried it up to bed that night the way you carry a coal in cupped hands, and it warmed him for a year. The wizarding world, meanwhile, could not leave the two of them alone, and Sirius spent a great deal of quiet effort making sure it never got close enough to matter. Harry Potter was famous before he could walk, the boy who lived, the child who had ended a war by surviving a curse that killed everyone else it touched, and the country had opinions about him the way it had opinions about the weather. That the boy who lived was being raised not by his blameless Muggle relations but by Sirius Black, the last unburnt lord of the most notorious pureblood house in Britain, gave the prophet a headline a month for 2 years. There were letters to the editor demanding the child be given to someone respectable. There were letters demanding he be put on display. There was a firm of enterprising sweet makers who tried to register boy who lived chocolate frogs and received, by return owl, a letter from Tiberius Ogden of such surgical menace that they went out of business rather than answer it. Sirius fought all of it the same way, without ever once raising his voice in public, with lawyers, with the family's old suffocating weight of gold and precedent, and with a flat refusal to let a single photographer within a mile of the Blackthorn wards. He would not have his son grow up as a symbol. A symbol is a thing the world does to a child. A son is a thing you do for one. He had decided which of those Harry would be before his son was 2, and he spent money and menace and years defending the decision. And the world grumbled and speculated and drew its own portraits of a child it was never permitted to meet. And behind the white blackthorn hedge the actual child dug for worms and learned his letters and had no idea he was famous at all until he was nearly 6, and even then did not care, because a boy who is loved has very little use for being admired. Birthdays at Blackthorn were the measure of the years. The last day of July always, with the moor gone purple with heather, and the pond warm enough to swim in if you were young and foolish, and Andromeda's cakes and Ted's card tricks, and Tonks turning her hair the exact scarlet of the icing to make Harry laugh, and Remus's presents, which were always books and always exactly right. Sirius gave Harry his father's snitch on his 5th birthday, the real one, the one James had caught in his last school final, and it woke to Harry's touch and hummed and hovered a foot from his nose while Harry stared at it with his father's own delight lighting his mother's green eyes, and Sirius had to go and stand by the window for a moment and look at nothing. On his 6th birthday Sirius gave him a broom, a proper child's broom that would not go higher than the top of the hedge, and Harry flew it into the pond within the hour and had to be fished out, and every adult at the party pretended to scold him and none of them managed it, and the whole warm day of it went up into the rafters of Blackthorn Hall and stayed, the way the laughter stayed, the way the light stayed, so that the house that had been built 400 years ago to keep the world out was slowly, birthday by birthday, being retrained to keep this in. The tapestry he brought from Grimmauld himself. It was the one thing of his family's he wanted, and he wanted it for a reason he could not have explained to the 16-year-old who had fled it. The Black family tree, woven and rewoven for 7 centuries, a vast thing that covered a whole wall, gold thread on green, every name of every Black stitched in and connected, and here and there among the names a small round scorch mark where some ancestor had taken a burning wand to the cloth and blasted a child out of the family for the crime of marrying wrong or thinking wrong or loving wrong. Andromeda was a scorch mark. His own name was a scorch mark. His mother had done it herself the year he ran to the Potters. He hung the tapestry in the long gallery at Blackthorn, and he stood in front of it one evening with a glass of fire whiskey and Harry playing with wooden blocks at his feet, and he looked at the scorch marks, all of them, all the burned-away children, and he thought about how the house had spent 400 years telling itself that it was pruning the tree, cutting away the weak wood. And how in truth every single burn was a place where someone had chosen love and the family had chosen to be smaller rather than allow it. "We're going to do it the other way round," he told the tapestry, and Harry looked up from his blocks at the sound of his voice. "You hear me, all of you, every one of you who ever held that wand. You cut names off to keep it pure. I'm going to sew names on. And when I'm done there'll be more of us than there ever were, and none of it will be blood, and you'll hate it, and there won't be a single thing you can do, because you're all dead and I'm not." He said it lightly, as he said most things, but the house heard him all the same. He knew it heard him because that night, and he was never entirely sure he had not dreamed it, the tapestry stirred where there was no draught, and low down on the great green field, in a corner that had been bare for a generation, a single fine gold thread lifted itself the width of a hair, and something in the old weave, some patience older than any of them, had begun, very slowly, to think about growing. Harry learned to walk at Blackthorn, and then to run in exactly the direction most likely to end in disaster, and Sirius learned the particular magic of parenthood, which is that it is one long emergency conducted at the pace of a slow green summer. He learned that a child does accidental magic the way a kettle boils without meaning anything by it. Harriet, too, turned his own hair from black to green because he liked the blackthorn leaves and turned it back when Sirius laughed, and neither of them thought it remarkable. He learned to teach without teaching. When Harry asked why the ceiling showed stars, Sirius told him about the stars. When Harry asked why the man in the portrait downstairs shouted, for he had brought only Walburga to Blackthorn, and only because leaving her at Grimmauld felt like leaving a wound unlanced, Sirius told him the truth, that she was his own mother, and that she had been very unhappy, and that unhappy people sometimes learn to make a noise instead of a life, and that Harry need never be afraid of her, because a portrait was only a painting of a person and could not so much as lift a teaspoon. Why is she unhappy? Harry asked, 3 years old and grave about it. Because she believed a lie all her life, Sirius said, about who's worth loving and who isn't, and by the time anyone tried to tell her it was a lie, she'd built her whole house out of it, and she'd rather the house than the truth. Harry considered this with the enormous seriousness of the very young, and then he went and got his blanket, the ratty one he could not sleep without, and he marched down the gallery to the portrait of Walburga Black, who drew breath to call him something unforgivable, and he held the blanket up over his head as high as his arms would go and said, "You can borrow it, it helps." The portrait did not know what to do with that. For once in her long, shrieking afterlife, Walburga Black was silent, and looked down at a 3-year-old half-blood offering her his blanket, and had no insult that fit. And Sirius, watching from the end of the gallery, understood that his son had just done, without effort, at 3, the thing that Sirius himself had been trying and failing to do to that portrait for a year, which was to disarm it not with a stronger curse, but with a kindness it had no defense against. He moved the portrait to a quiet upstairs room after that, not as a punishment but almost as a mercy, and he took to visiting it himself once a week and saying nothing much, and over years the screaming grew less, though it never entirely stopped, because some wounds a family carries are too old to close and can only be sat with. Creature came to Blackthorn in the 2nd year, and it was Harry who brought him, in a manner of speaking. Sirius had left the elf at Grimmauld out of a species of contempt he was not proud of, and the house elf had grown stranger and more bitter alone in the shut-up house, muttering to the walls, hoarding trinkets in his nest under the boiler, and when Sirius went at last to close the London house properly, and found the creature half-starved among relics of a family that had thrown him away as surely as it had thrown away Sirius, something turned over in him that he had not expected. He brought Creature west because he could not in the end do to a living thing what his family had done to everything. The elf arrived hating them all and hated them for a year, and did his work with the venom of a wasp, and might have gone on hating them until he died of it, except that Harry, 5 years old and incapable of understanding that anyone might not wish to be loved, simply refused to accept it. He said good morning to Creature. He brought Creature the first strawberry from Andromeda's garden every June, warm from the sun, and left it on the kitchen sill without comment. He asked Creature questions about the old days, about Master Regulus, whose name the elf spoke the way a monk speaks a saint's, and he listened, actually listened, to the long broken stories. And one autumn evening Sirius came into the kitchen and found his son sitting cross-legged on the flags while Creature, weeping the thin gray tears of the very old, told him about a boy named Regulus who had been kind to a house elf once, and had gone away one night to do a brave and secret thing, and had never come home. Sirius stood in the doorway and did not interrupt. He had spent his childhood believing his brother a coward and a villain, and he was learning from an elf and a 5-year-old that it might have been more complicated than that, and that there might be, folded away somewhere in the guilt he carried for Regulus, a grief he had never let himself feel. He said nothing that night. But he began after that to speak to Creature differently, and Creature, by degrees too small to see day to day, began the long thaw that would matter in the end more than any of them could have guessed. Remus taught Harry to read. It surprised no one who knew Remus and delighted no one more than Remus himself, who had spent his life being told what he could not have and discovered in a small boy on a hearthrug, something no one could take from him. They went through the whole shelf of Sirius's disreputable childhood books and then the shelf of Remus's respectable ones, and by 5 Harry could read better than half the third years Remus remembered, and by 6 he had found his way, small and determined, into the Blackthorn Library, which was a room Sirius had left almost exactly as his great-uncle Marius had kept it. 6,000 volumes of Black family lore going back to the Conquest, and he had found there, of all things, the histories. Uncle Padfoot, Harry said one evening. He had taken to calling Sirius Padfoot, having heard Remus do it, and Sirius had not corrected him, because it was better than what the ministry file called him and better, in its way, than anything else. Uncle Padfoot were the Blacks bad. Sirius put down the harness he was mending, for they kept a pair of the Strals now, in the paddock past the Blackthorn, and looked at the child who had climbed up beside him with a great cracked volume of family history open across both their knees. Some of them, he said, a lot of them, not all. He was careful with it. He had promised himself he would always be careful with this particular truth, would never hand the child either a hero's family or a villain's, but the real thing, which was worse and better than both. The Blacks were clever, and they were brave, some of them, and they were rich, and they were proud, and they took all of that and they used it for 400 years, mostly to hurt people who weren't like them, and they called it honor. That's the thing you have to understand about our family, Harry. They weren't stupid and they weren't weak. That's what made them dangerous. It's easy to be good when you've got nothing. The Blacks had everything, and they chose, over and over, to be small with it. And a few of them, he touched a name on the page, Phineas Nigellus and another, and his own great-uncle Marius, who had been a squib and been quietly written out and had lived and died alone in this very house rather than pretend to be something he was not. A few of them chose the other way, and it cost them. It always cost them, and they did it anyway. Which one are you going to be? Harry asked. The other way, Sirius said. I decided the day I met your father. And you get to decide too, when you're bigger, what a Black is. That's the whole reason I'm raising you here instead of somewhere easier. You're going to grow up knowing exactly what this family was, all of it, the good and the rotten, and then you're going to be the one who gets to say what it's going to be next, you and whoever else I'm lucky enough to bring under this roof. He closed the book. There's power in the name, real power, old magic, the kind that answers to blood and to a lord's word. And I'd rather it answered to you than to anyone else alive, because you, Pronkslet, are the least cruel person I've ever met, and that's exactly the sort of person the House of Black has needed for about 700 years and never once had. Harry did not understand all of it. But he understood that he had been given something, and that it was heavy, and that Padfoot thought he could carry it, and he sat with the closed book on his knees in the lamplight and felt himself grow, in some invisible way, an inch. There was one thing Sirius showed him that winter that he had shown no one else. On the smallest finger of his left hand Sirius wore a ring he never took off, black stone and old silver, the arms of the house cut into it so fine you needed the light at an angle to read them, and when Harry asked about it Sirius took it off, which he had never once done in front of him, and laid it in the child's palm. The stone drank the firelight and gave nothing back, and something moved in it as it settled against Harry's skin, a slow turning over, an animal opening one eye. That's the family ring, Sirius said quietly. It knows who's a Black and who's the Lord and who's neither. It answers to blood and it answers to a Lord's word, and those two things are not always the same, which is a lesson it took our family 4 centuries not to learn. It's cold to strangers. It should be dead cold in your hand right now. He watched the stone. It isn't, though, is it? It was not. It lay warm against Harry's palm as a stone left in the sun, and along the fine-cut arms a thread of pale light had come up, faint as a pulse, and Harry, 7 years old, looked from the warm ring to Sirius with a question he did not have the words for, and Sirius, who did have the words and had decided long ago to give the child only true ones, chose them with care. The magic in our name isn't only blood, he said. That's the lie the family told for 400 years, that it was only blood, that blood was everything. But the old wards don't read blood, they read what a person is, and it seems the house can feel you coming, Harry. It's been feeling you since the night I carried you through the door at Grimmauld, and it didn't like it, and it's changed its mind the way I did, the way this whole gray pile of a house has, one room at a time. I'm not going to make you anything you don't choose. But I'll tell you what I hope, since we're being honest by the fire. I hope that one day, when you're grown and you understand it all, you'll let me name you what the ring already half thinks you are. Heir of the House of Black, not because of your blood, because of what you are. He took the ring back gently, and it went cold the instant it left the child's hand, and Harry watched the light die out of it and understood, without being told, that he had been shown something the world was not shown, and that it was a kind of love. By 7, Harry had the run of the house and the moor in a childhood so complete he never once thought to name it, which is the only kind worth having. He had a father who was not his father and did not pretend to be, and who told him about James at every asking, so that the dead man was present in the house as a warmth rather than a wound. He had an Uncle Mooney who taught him to love the shape of a sentence and never once made him feel that gentleness was a lesser thing than daring. He had a cousin who could be anyone and chose, at every visit, to be his. He had this Strauss in the paddock that only he and the grown-ups could see, and a ceiling full of real stars, and a family ring in a drawer that thought it knew what he was going to become. What he did not have, and had never asked for because he did not know it was missing, was someone his own size. He was, though he had no word for it and would not have used the word if he had, a little lonely at the exact center of a very full life. And the house, which felt these things before the people in it did, had been growing a single gold thread in the corner of an old tapestry for 5 years, and was nearly now ready. It was the following winter that the letter came. Sirius had taken, in the years since his clearing, to making himself useful in the parts of the wizarding world that no one else wanted. He had money, and he had a name that opened doors, and he had a particular, private, unhealed fury on behalf of any child that anyone tried to make small, and he had turned all 3 toward a thing the ministry funded badly and thought about never: the welfare of magical children who had no one to teach them what they were, Muggle-borns whose parents were frightened, orphans. Children flagged by the improper use of magic office for accidental magic too strong or too strange to ignore, children who set things alight when they wept and mended broken things without knowing how, and were, more often than the ministry liked to admit, taken quietly into custody and obliviated and forgotten. Sirius sat on the board that was supposed to prevent that, and mostly he prevented it by shouting, and once by threatening a career, and the work suited him. The letter that came that winter was a copy of a routine flag from the trace office, forwarded to the board because a junior clerk with a conscience had thought someone ought to look at it, and Sirius read it twice at the breakfast table while Harry, 7 now, ate his porridge and told Remus at length about a dream involving the Strauss and a great deal of cheese. An incident of accidental magic in Oxfordshire. A girl, 7 years old, Muggle-born, no known magical relations. Cornered in a school playground by 3 older children who had been tormenting her for months, and something had happened, and the report was careful and dry and frightened underneath the dryness. The 3 older children had been found 40 feet up the largest oak on the school grounds, unharmed, weeping, entirely unable to explain how they had got there or come down. Every window on the eastern side of the school had cracked in a single instant into the same spiraling pattern. And the girl, the 7-year-old, had walked home alone, and told no one, and been found by her parents that evening sitting very straight and very quiet in her room reading a library book 3 years above her age, as though nothing at all had happened, as though she had simply decided that if the world was going to be like that, she would learn everything in it and beat it that way. The clerk had appended 1 line of her own, against regulations. The magnitude is well outside the ordinary range for the age. The signature is unusual. Recommend a home visit by someone who knows what they are doing before the standard team is sent. Sirius read the line about the signature 3 times. The signature is unusual. He knew what that meant, or thought he did, in the technical sense the office meant it. The shape a person's magic made, as individual as a face, and this child's was reading strange, reading old, reading like something the flat modern instruments of the trace office did not have a category for. He looked at the name of the school and the name of the village and the name of the girl, which meant nothing to him, a good plain Muggle name, and then he looked down the gallery through the open door to the great green tapestry on the wall, where a single fine gold thread had lifted itself the width of a hair one night 5 years ago, and had, in the years since, when he was not looking, when no one was looking, been very slowly, very quietly growing. Remus, Sirius said. He set the letter down. Across the table his son looked up from his porridge, and the light off the snow outside the window came in white and clean and lay across his son's face and across the letter and across the name of a girl in Oxfordshire that Sirius did not yet know he had been waiting 7 years to read. Remus, I think I'd better take this one myself. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The girl who burned too bright the house in Oxfordshire had a green door and a hedge trimmed to the inch, and a car in the drive polished to the point of vanity, and Sirius Black stood on the step in the good grey robes he kept for occasions when he needed to look like a person the ministry trusted, and rang a bell that played 8 notes of a tune he did not know, and thought that whatever he had expected from the family of a child who could put 3 bullies 40 feet up an oak. This tidy suburban calm was not it. Remus stood a pace behind him with a leather case of forms they did not intend to use, there for the shape of the thing, because a strange man does not come alone to a Muggle door to talk about their child. The door opened on a woman in her middle 30s with Hermione's exact jaw, though Sirius did not yet know it was Hermione's jaw, and a wariness in her that had been installed recently and by force. Behind her, a step down the hall, a broad, quiet man had come out of a front room and stood with a newspaper still in his hand and his whole posture arranged, without any drama about it, between the strangers and the stairs. Sirius knew that posture. He had lived that posture for 7 years. It was the posture of a parent who has decided that the world is not to be trusted with their child and is prepared to be extremely boring about it for as long as necessary. "Mr. and Mrs. Granger," Sirius said, and took the wariness head-on because he had learned that the only way past a good parent's guard was to hand them your throat. "My name is Sirius Black. I know you've had a hard few months, and I know a man you've never met turning up on your step is precisely the last thing you want, and I promise you I'm not from the school and I'm not from the council and I'm not selling anything. I'm here about the oak tree and the windows. And the thing that happened that everyone has been very carefully not saying out loud to you, because they haven't got the words for it, and I have." The newspaper lowered in the hall. Helen Granger looked at him for a long moment, and something in the plain directness of it reached her where a smoother approach would have failed, and she stepped back and held the door and said, in the voice of a woman going over a cliff she has already decided to go over, "You'd better come in then, both of you." Robert put the kettle on, and Mr. Black, she stopped him in the hall with a hand that did not quite touch his sleeve. "Whatever you've come to tell us the truth of it. We've had 3 months of people being kind and vague. I would rather be frightened than managed." "I can promise you frightened," Sirius said, not unkindly. "Managed was never really my strength." They sat in a front room that smelled of furniture polish and had a piano no one played, and Robert Granger made tea in cups with saucers, and Sirius told them the truth, all of it, as he had told a 3-year-old the truth about an unhappy portrait, which is to say completely and gently and without pretending any of it was small. He told them their daughter was a witch. He watched them not laugh, which told him a great deal about the last 3 months. He told them what that meant, the whole architecture of a hidden world, the school she would be invited to at 11, the wand she would one day carry, the reason the windows had cracked, and the reason the bullies had gone up the tree, which was that a frightened, furious, extraordinarily powerful 7-year-old with no idea what she was had reached for something to save herself, and the world had answered. He told them it was not a disease and not a curse and not their fault and not, whatever they had been privately fearing in the dark, a sign that they were about to lose her. He learned, as he talked, the shape of the 3 months from the things they let slip. There had been the incident with the oak, which had brought a letter from the school, and a visit from a man in a gray suit who asked questions that went nowhere. But there had been other things, smaller, older, that they had spent years explaining away and could no longer. The way the books Hermione wanted always seemed to fall open at the right page. The winter she was 5 and had a fever, and every candle in the house had lit itself at once when she cried out in the night, which Robert had told himself was a draught and a trick of the eye, and had not in his heart believed. The mended teacup that no one had mended. The plants on her windowsill that flowered out of season. Helen had kept a private list, it turned out, a little diary of impossible things, begun the year Hermione was 3, hidden in a drawer, added to in secret whenever it happened again, because a rational woman who mends nothing and grows nothing had needed some evidence that she was not going mad. She fetched it now and put it in Sirius's hands, this small, ordinary notebook full of a mother's careful, frightened handwriting, years of it. And Sirius turned the pages and read the whole hidden history of a magical child growing up unnamed among people who loved her and had no word for what she was, and he closed it gently and gave it back and said, "You did everything right. You kept her safe and you kept her loved, and you wrote it all down so that one day someone could tell you what it meant. I'm that someone, and what it means is that she's magnificent and none of it was ever going wrong. It was only going unexplained. You're not going to lose her," he said. "I need you to hear that before anything else because it's the thing you've been afraid to ask. There are official people, and I used to be more polite about them than I am now, who, when a child does what your daughter did, arrive and manage it and manage it and manage it until somehow the child ends up managed right out of the family. I have spent 7 years making sure that stops happening. I run the board that's supposed to prevent it. That's why they sent your daughter's file to me instead of to a team with a memory charm and a form. Nobody is taking Hermione anywhere she doesn't choose to go. But she's going to need teaching, and she's going to need to meet others like her, and she's going to need, fairly soon, to understand that she is not broken because I think, correct me, I think she's decided she's broken and she's dealing with it the way clever, lonely children always deal with everything, which is to try to read her way out of it." Helen Granger put her cup down. Her hand was not quite steady. She's read every book in the house, she said. The children's library, the adult library. She's 8 in September and she's reading things I can't follow. The teachers say she's difficult. She isn't difficult. The mother's voice did a thing. She's lonely, Mr. Black. She's so clever the other children can't reach her and she's so lonely she can't reach them. And now she's frightened of herself on top of it, and she sits up there in her room with the door shut and she reads, and she won't cry in front of us because she's decided crying is a thing that happens to people who can't cope, and she's 8. She stopped. Robert had put his hand over hers on the arm of the sofa. Can you help her, not manage her, help her? Yes, Sirius said. I think I might be the only person in England who can, and I'll tell you why in a minute, and it's going to sound mad even after everything else I've said. But first, may I meet her, not to test her, just to meet her. I have a feeling she and I are going to get on because I was a difficult, clever child too, and I know the tribe on sight. Robert Granger went up and knocked and murmured and came down, and behind him, at the turn of the stair, a girl appeared. She was small for 8, all elbows, and a great quantity of brown hair that had clearly defeated every attempt to organize it. And she came down the stairs with a book held against her chest like a shield, and her chin up at an angle Sirius recognized because he had worn it himself at that age. The angle of a child who has learned that the best defense against a world that finds you strange is to find it first, and to have read more about it than it has read about you. Her eyes went over the 2 strange men and catalogued them, quick and thorough, the good robes, the leather case, the scars on the quiet one's face, and came back to Sirius and narrowed. You're not from the school, she said. It was not a question. You don't sit like people from the school, and you, to Remus, your cuffs are frayed, but your Latin's on the case in gold, which means you care about words and not about cuffs, so you're a teacher of some kind, but not the kind that gets paid. And you both keep almost looking at the corner by the piano where the light does the funny thing, which nobody's ever mentioned, so you've noticed it, which means you know what it is, which means. She stopped, and the chin came down a fraction, and under the armor something very young looked out for a second, which means you're here about me. About what I did. Are you going to make me forget it? No, said Sirius. Everyone else wants me to forget it. Everyone else is frightened of it. I'm not, because I know exactly what it is, and it isn't a bad thing, Hermione. It's the opposite of a bad thing, and I'd very much like to be the person who gets to tell you what it is, if you'll let me, because you've clearly worked out most of it already, and I hate to think of you carrying the rest of it alone up there behind a shut door. He gestured at the chair across from him, an invitation and not an instruction. The light does the funny thing in the corner because there's a great deal of magic in this room at the moment, and rooms hold it the way a pan holds heat. That's the first true thing anyone's told you in 3 months, isn't it? You've been collecting the lies. You've got a whole shelf of them by now. I'm not going to add to it. The girl looked at him. She looked at the chair. She was weighing it, all of it, with the ferocious care of someone who has been let down enough to have made a study of it, and Sirius sat quite still and let her weigh, because you do not hurry a clever, wounded child. You wait for them to decide you are worth the risk. And she came at last and perched on the edge of the chair with the book still against her chest, and said, in a rush, in the voice of a dam that has been holding too long, I put Kevin Aldous and 2 others up a tree, and I don't know how I did it, and the windows all broke at once in the same pattern, and the pattern was beautiful. It was a spiral. It was a proper logarithmic spiral. I looked it up. And nobody will talk about it, and Mum cries when she thinks I can't hear, and the doctor gave me a leaflet about anxiety, and I'm not anxious. The book pressed harder against her chest. I'm something, and nobody will tell me what. And I've read everything, and it isn't in any of the books, and I hate not knowing things. I hate it more than anything in the world, so if you actually know what I am, then please, please, just say it. Say the word. I can take the word. I can take anything except the not knowing. You're a witch, Sirius said. A very, very good one. Possibly one of the best I've ever met, and I've met the best there are. The word is witch, Hermione. And it's the beginning of the answer, not the end of it, and I've got the whole rest of the answer in a house on a moor with a library 6,000 books deep, and a ceiling full of stars, and a boy your own age who's going to like you enormously. And I came all this way today because I think you and I are, in a manner I'll explain to your parents in a moment, something rather closer than a stranger and a girl he read about in a file. She stared at him. The word had gone into her like water into cracked ground. A witch, she repeated, and then, because she was who she was and would be who she was for the rest of her remarkable life, prove it. Sirius took out his wand and glanced at the parents for permission, and at Robert's small nod he turned the piano no. 1 played, gently, the whole heavy black weight of it, into a large and dignified swan, which stretched its wings and looked around the front room with enormous disdain and honked once. And Hermione Granger came up off the edge of the chair with her book falling forgotten to the floor and her whole armored, lonely, ferocious little face broken wide open into something that had not been on it when she came down the stairs, and Sirius, watching it happen, understood that he had already, without quite deciding to, taken this one in. How, she demanded, circling the swan, how is it the same mass? It must be the same mass. Where does the extra neck come from? Is it real? Can I touch it? Is it going to be a piano again? How? That, said Sirius, turning the swan patiently back into a piano before it could foul the carpet, is precisely the right question, and it is going to take you about 11 years to answer it properly, and I know exactly the school where you'll do it. But first I have to tell your mother and father something about your great-great-great-grandmother. Sit down, Hermione, this part's for all of you. He told them about Yola. He had found her 3 nights before, and he did not tell the Grangers the whole of how, because some of it was the private business of a house and would have frightened them for the wrong reasons, but it had happened like this. He had read the file at the breakfast table, and read the line about the signature, the magnitude well outside the ordinary range, and he had gone that same night, alone at first and then with Remus, down the long gallery at Blackthorn with a lamp, to the one thing in the world that might tell him why a Muggle-born child in Oxfordshire had a signature that read old. The tapestry hung the length of the gallery, 12 feet of it, gold thread on a field gone the deep green of a forest at dusk, and by lamplight the woven names seemed to lift a little off the cloth and swim. 7 centuries of blacks, king's cousins and killers, and a minister for magic, and a great many people who had been merely rich and merely cruel, all of them stitched into the branching tree with the family words running along the bottom in letters a foot high, Tauger's purr, always pure. The lie the whole vast thing had been woven to tell. Sirius had gone to the bottom corner, where the gold thread he had glimpsed years ago had been quietly working, and he had held the lamp close, and Remus beside him had drawn a slow breath, because the thread had done in 5 years what no living hand could have made it do. It had climbed. It ran up out of the bare green corner and into the body of the tree, fine and bright and new against the tarnished old gold around it, threading itself up through generation after generation until it reached and stopped at and grew out of a scorch mark. The burn was 200 years old and no bigger than a galleon, low on a branch that forked off the main line in the 1700s, and Sirius had passed it 100 times and never once wondered whose grave it was. The family had done its work thoroughly. There was no name left, not a letter, not the ghost of a letter, only the round black wound in the weave where a wand had touched and a daughter had been unmade. But the tapestry was older and deeper than any wand that had ever scorched it, and it answered to the lord of the house. And when Sirius knelt and set his ringed hand flat against the burn and asked it, in the old way, who had been here, the cloth had grown warm under his palm, and the green threads around the wound had stirred like grass in a wind that was not there. And up out of 200 years of deliberate forgetting the weave had given him, grudging, reluctant, one word, spelling itself letter by letter in new gold along the scorched branch while he and Remus watched and neither of them breathed. Yola. She'd been waiting, Remus had said quietly in the gallery in the lamplight, looking at the name coming back into the world. 200 years, the house never forgot her. It only wasn't allowed to say her name. And Sirius had knelt there with his hand on the warm cloth and thought that of all the cruelties his family had committed, the burning away of the ones who chose love, this was the one the house itself had never agreed to, and had been waiting, patient as stone, for a lord who would let it undo. Yola Black, Sirius told the Grangers in their tidy front room, with the swan piano restored and their daughter perfectly still for the first time since she had come down the stairs. My family had a daughter 7 generations back called Yola, and she did the unforgivable thing, by the standards of the House of Black, the very worst thing a Black could do. She fell in love with a Muggle, an ordinary man, no magic in him at all. I believe he was a builder actually, which I find I rather like, and she married him. And the family gave her the choice they always gave, give him up or be given up. And Yola Black looked at 400 years of pride and gold and a name that opened every door in Britain, and she looked at her builder and she chose the builder. So they burned her off the wall, struck her name out, forbade it spoken, told everyone she'd died, and as far as the House of Black was concerned, she had. She went off into the Muggle world and she never came back, and she had children, and those children had children, and the magic in the blood went quiet, the way it does, skipping down the generations, sleeping. He looked at Hermione, until it woke up all at once with a great deal of interest to make up for 200 years, and a girl who put 3 bullies up an oak and broke every window on the east side of her school in a perfect logarithmic spiral. You're not broken, Hermione. You're not even new, you're 200 years old, you're the thread the family thought it had burned away, growing back. The room was very quiet, the swan piano gleamed. Robert Granger, a practical man who mended people's teeth for a living and did not believe in things until they were put in front of him, said slowly, "You're telling us our daughter is, what, some sort of aristocrat of your world?" "I'm telling you," Sirius said, "that by the oldest law my family has, older than the ministry, older than the wands that did the burning, your daughter is a Black. The tapestry knows it. It's been growing her thread back for 5 years, which is a thing tapestries do not do lightly, and which no living Black has the power to make it do. The house itself decided Iola's line should come home. And the House of Black does not have many children left, Mr. Granger. My cousin Bellatrix is in a cell she will die in. My cousin Narcissa married into another family. Andromeda was burned off same as Yola. I've no children of my own blood and I never will. There's one boy I'm raising who I mean to name my heir, though he's a Potter by blood, not a Black, and now there's Hermione, who is a Black by blood, by the family's own ancient reckoning, whether the family likes it or not." He paused. "I promise you, some of what's left of the family is going to like it very much less than you can currently imagine, which is exactly why I'd rather she learned who she was from me, in a house full of people who love her, than from someone who'd use it against her." Helen Granger had been watching her daughter's face all through this, the way a mother watches, and now she said quietly the real question, the only one that mattered to her. What does it mean for her? Not the tapestry, not the family, her. "What are you actually offering, Mr. Black?" Sirius put down his tea. "A choice," he said, "which is the one thing my family never offered anybody. Here it is plainly. Hermione is going to be a witch, whatever anyone does. That's decided. It was decided 200 years ago. She needs teaching now, not at 11 now, because magic this strong doesn't wait politely for a school letter. It comes out sideways, in trees and windows, and it will keep coming out until someone teaches her to hold it. I can teach her, so can Remus. We're already teaching a boy her exact age, and he is, I'll be honest, going quietly out of his mind with loneliness at the center of a very happy house, because there's no one his own size and his own strangeness for 100 miles. What I'm offering is this: let her come to us. Not instead of you, God, not instead of you. I'd sooner cut my hand off than do to you what was done to Yola's parents' hearts. Let her come and learn and grow up partly in our world, where she belongs and can stop being the strange one and come home to you whenever she wants, holidays, weekends. The fire's always lit, and there's a way of traveling I'll teach you that takes about 4 seconds. 2 homes, 2 families that become 1 family. You keep your daughter and she gets a whole world besides. And I'll put it in writing, in your law and in mine, that she is yours always, and that any day she wants to walk away from all of it and be an ordinary girl in Oxfordshire, she can, and I'll defend that right against anyone, up to and including my own dead mother, who I assure you will have opinions." Robert Granger looked at his wife. A whole marriage passed between them without a word, the way it does with people who have been afraid together and hopeful together for a long time. Then he looked at his daughter, who had not said anything, who was sitting very still with her hands folded and her eyes enormous, doing the thing she did, which was working it out, all of it, the offer and the risk, in the shape of a life. "Hermione," her father said, "it's yours. This one's yours to decide, love. Nobody's deciding it for you." And Hermione Granger, 8 years old, who had come down the stairs an hour before with a book held against her chest like a shield, looked at the tall, strange man who had turned a piano into a swan and told her the truth when no one else would, and asked the only question that a girl like her would ever think to ask first. "The boy my age," she said, "at your house, what's he like?" And the chin came up, defended, hopeful, unbearable. "Is he clever? Because I don't mind if he's not braver than me or faster than me, but I should like very much, just once, to have a friend who's clever. I've never had one. I'd like to know if it's as good as I think it would be." "His name is Harry," Sirius said gently. "And he's the kindest person I've ever met, and he's braver than he knows, and he isn't cleverer than you. I'd not insult you by pretending anyone is, but he'll never once make you feel bad for being cleverer than him, which is rarer and worth a great deal more. Come and meet him, just meet him. If you don't like each other, you never have to come again, but I don't think that's going to be the problem." Harry had been told about her on the Monday, and spent the rest of the week in a condition Remus diagnosed, privately, as hope, which in an 8-year-old is a kind of low fever. Sirius had said only that there was a girl his own age who might visit, a witch, clever, lonely, in want of exactly the sort of friend that 100 miles of empty moor had so far failed to provide, and Harry had gone very still at the word friend, and then very busy. He tidied the library, which had never been tidied in living memory and was not improved by it. He asked Remus at least 4 times a day what she was likely to want to talk about, and got 4 different unhelpful answers, because Remus was enjoying himself. He got out his father's snitch and put it away again, unsure whether it would be showing off. He lay under his charmed stars on the Friday night and could not sleep, turning over the enormous unfamiliar possibility that somewhere in England there was a person his own size who might, if he did not ruin it, actually like him, not the boy who lived, whom he had lately worked out he was meant to be and privately found ridiculous, but him, Harry, who got stuck in Chapter 2 and could see horses nobody else could. He had never wanted anything so specifically in his life, and he had the sense, rare in the young, to be a little afraid of wanting it, because he had already worked out, the way loved children eventually do, that the more a thing matters, the more it can be lost. She came the following Saturday. They traveled by flu, which Sirius taught the whole family in the front room with a bag of powder and a great deal of laughter, Robert Granger arriving in the Blackthorn kitchen, entirely covered in soot, and declaring it the single most undignified thing that had ever happened to a chartered dentist. Helen following more neatly, Hermione last, stepping out of green flame into the warm stone kitchen of a house 400 years old with her hair full of ash and her eyes already moving, cataloguing. Drinking it in, the flagged floor, the copper pans, the enormous hearth, the light, and Harry was waiting. He had been told, of course, and had spent the week in an agony of hope he could not have named, tidying rooms no one had asked him to tidy. And now he stood by the kitchen table in his best jumper, 8 years old, black hair defeating its comb exactly as his father's had, green eyes fixed on the fireplace. And when the girl stepped out of the flame, he opened his mouth to say the thing he had rehearsed, the welcome, the polite, kind thing, and none of it came. Because she had already seen the tall shelf of books on the kitchen wall over his shoulder, and gone straight past him toward it as though pulled on a wire. "You've got magical theory, Adalbert waffling," she said to the shelf, reverent. "The proper one, the unabridged. They said it was too hard for children. Is it? Have you read it? Does the argument in chapter 4 actually hold up? Because I couldn't tell from the review." And then she stopped and turned round and seemed to realize she had walked straight past an actual person to get to a book, and the tips of her ears went red, and she said, mortified, in a very small voice, "Sorry, hello, I'm Hermione, I do that, everyone hates it." "I haven't read chapter 4, Harry said. "I got stuck in chapter 2, it's really hard." He said it simply, without shame, the way Sirius had taught him that not knowing was only the front door of knowing. "But you could read it and tell me if it holds up, and then I'd know, and I wouldn't have had to read chapter 4, which seems like a good deal for me." He considered her, the ash in her hair, the mortified red ears, the fierce, hopeful, defended set of her. "I don't hate it," he added, "the book thing, I think it's brilliant. Padfoot's clever, but he's clever like a joke. He's not clever like that, like you just were. I didn't even know the piano thing had a name. What was it? The spiral." "A logarithmic spiral," Hermione said, and the red ears forgot to be red. "It's the same shape as a nautilus shell and a hurricane and a whole galaxy. It's everywhere. It's the shape things make when they grow." And she looked at him, this boy who had not minded, who had not made her small, who had asked her a question and actually wanted the answer, and something in her that had been holding its breath for 8 years let a little of it go. Behind them, in the doorway, 4 adults had gone very quiet. Sirius stood with Remus at his shoulder and the 2 sets of parents behind, and none of them spoke, because the 2 children had forgotten there was anyone else in the room at all, had folded down together onto the bench at the kitchen table with the great book open between them and Harry pointing at chapter 2 and Hermione already reading ahead, arguing softly, both of them lit gold by the westering sun through the kitchen window, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world, 2 children and a book. And Sirius found he could not speak for a moment and did not try. They read for an hour and argued about chapter 4, which did hold up, Hermione decided, though the notation was lazy. And then Harry, who had been rehearsing this too all week, closed the book and said, "Do you want to see the Thestrals? We've got 2. Most people can't see them at all, only Padfoot and Moony and me and Andromeda, because you have to have." He stopped, because he had been going to say the true thing and was not sure he was allowed. Hermione looked at him and waited, as she always waited when a fact was being withheld. "You have to have seen someone die," Harry finished simply. "That's the rule of them. I saw my mum. I was too little to remember it, but the Thestrals think I remember, so I can see them. I don't mind. It means I get horses nobody else does." Hermione was quiet a moment. She did not say she was sorry, which he had grown very tired of people saying and which she seemed to understand he was tired of without being told. She said instead, "Can I see them if I've never?" And then she stopped, working it out, and her face did a complicated thing. "No, I don't want to be able to see them. Not yet. That's a horrible way to get to see a horse." "That's exactly what I think," said Harry, delighted, "and nobody else thinks it. Everyone says, 'Isn't it sad you can see them?' And I say no, it's the one good thing, and they look at me funny." And just like that, a thing was settled between the 2 of them that neither of them had words for, and neither of them would have to explain to the other ever again. He took her out anyway, past the white blackthorn hedge and along the paddock rail, and though she could not see the Thestrals, she could see the flattened grass where they grazed and the apples lifting themselves one by one off Harry's flat palm and vanishing into invisible mouths, and she laughed, the surprised, undefended laugh of a child who has not laughed enough, and stood at the rail feeding apples to horses she could not see, while the sun went down orange over the moor. Harry showed her the horse pond he had flown his broom into, and the orchard Andromeda had brought back from the dead, and the great gray shoulder of the hill going purple with heather, and Hermione walked through all of it with her arms wrapped around herself against the cool coming up off the ground, and said at one point to no one in a voice she did not know Harry could hear, "It's real. It's actually real. I'm not making it up." And Harry, who had never in his life had to doubt that his home was real, understood suddenly and completely what it must be to be Hermione, to have known there was a right shape to the world, and to have been told for 8 years that you were imagining it. And he came and stood at the rail beside her and did not say anything, because Padfoot had taught him that the kindest thing you can do with someone else's hard truth is stand next to it and not flinch. When it was full dark, he took her up to his room, with both sets of parents trailing and pretending they were not, and he lay down on the rug as he did every night and told her to lie down next to him and look up, and Hermione looked up, and the charmed ceiling gave her the whole real sky over the moor, the actual stars wheeling slow, and she went completely silent, which the adults in the doorway would later agree was the most remarkable thing that happened all day. Hermione Granger struck wordless. And she lay on the rug of a house 400 years old next to a boy she had met that afternoon and stared up at the turning stars, and after a long time she lifted one hand and pointed at the brightest of them all low in the south and said, "That one, what's that one?" "That's the dog star," Harry said. "Sirius, Padfoot's named after it. He says it's been keeping an eye on me since before I was born." He considered. "I expect it can keep an eye on you too, if you come and live here." "It's big enough." Hermione did not answer for a while, and then she said in a very small and very careful voice, the voice of a girl putting down a shield she has carried so long her arms have forgotten how to be empty, "I think I'd like to come and live here. Some of the time, if that's really allowed, if you really wouldn't mind." And Harry said, "I've been hoping you'd say that since Tuesday," and neither of them said anything else, and the stars turned over them both. It was not decided all in one night, because Sirius had promised the Grangers it would not be, and because Sirius had learned from his own childhood that the things done to children in a single grand irreversible stroke are exactly the things that break them. So it was done slowly, as he had rebuilt the house, as he did everything now. Hermione came for a Saturday, and then for a whole weekend, and then for the last 2 weeks of the school holidays, and each time she went home to Oxfordshire lit up in a way her parents had not seen in a year, talking so fast they could not follow her, about Waffling's Chapter 4, and about a boy called Harry who did not mind being told when he was wrong, and about a ceiling full of real stars. Helen Granger, watching her daughter come home whole, wept once in the kitchen where Hermione could not see, not with grief but with the particular exhaustion of a mother who has been frightened for a long time and is allowed at last to stop. Robert learned the flu and stopped arriving covered in soot by about the 4th attempt and began, to his own surprise, to look forward to the strange warm kitchen at the end of it, where a lord of an ancient magical house would put a mug of tea in his hand and talk to him, a dentist, as an equal, because Sirius Black had discovered that ordinary decent muggles were restful company after a lifetime among people who thought blood was a personality. Remus took charge of Hermione's mind as he had taken charge of Harry's, and found in her the student he had privately dreamed of and never dared expect, a child who did not need to be made to want to learn but only to be pointed at the shelf and stood clear of. He gave her the beginner's texts, and she had finished them by the next weekend and wanted the intermediate ones. He gave her those, and she came back with objections. He taught the 2 children together, at the kitchen table and in the library and out on the moor, and he watched a thing happen between them that he had only ever read about and never seen. 2 clever children of exactly the right age who did not compete but completed. Harry's warmth taking the sharp edges off Hermione's certainty, and Hermione's certainty giving Harry's warmth something to be certain about, so that the pair of them together were somehow larger than the sum. And got into more and better trouble and learned faster and laughed more. By the end of that first summer nobody at Blackthorn could quite remember the shape of the house without her in it, and the Grangers had begun, without any of them announcing it, to spend Sundays at the hall, 2 families folding quietly into one over a long table, and Sirius sat at the head of it one evening with Muggle dentists on one side and a werewolf on the other and 2 children arguing happily about magical theory in the middle, and thought that 400 years of his ancestors were spinning in their graves, and that this was, without any question, the finest thing the House of Black had ever done. Under the flagged floor, deep in the foundation stone of Blackthorn Hall, something ancient shifted and settled, the way the wards had shifted the first time he set his blood to the gate, an old attention swinging to a new weight in the house. And far down the long gallery, unwatched in the bottom corner of a 400-year-old tapestry, the single gold thread that had been growing for 5 years reached the end of its long climb, and made at last its first full stitch, bright and new and impossible, a name coming back into the weave that the family had burned away and sworn to forget, and beside it, where the pattern had room, the weave had already begun, very quietly, to leave a space for one more. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, 2 heirs. By the time they were 10, they had a system, and the system was this. Hermione learned the rule, and Harry learned the exception, and between them they were never once caught out. It had started as a game and hardened into something more useful than a game. Sirius set them problems at the long table after breakfast, the kind of problems his own tutors had set him and he had thrown across the room, and where Sirius had been a bored clever boy who wanted only to be somewhere else, these 2 fell on the problems like a pair of terriers on a rat. Hermione would have the theory inside a minute, the clean shape of it, the law that governed it. And then Harry, who did not think in laws, who thought in people and edges and the particular way things actually behaved when you weren't being careful, would find the crack in it. The case where the law bent, and Hermione would argue that the case was impossible, and Harry would do the impossible case, usually setting something alight, and Hermione would be forced, spitting with outrage and delight, to rewrite her clean law to admit the mess, and the law would be better for it, and so would they. "You do realize," Remus said to Sirius, watching them from the library door one wet October afternoon, the 2 of them bent over a diagram of war geometry that was 3 years beyond either of them in losing, "that you are not raising 2 children." You are raising one rather alarming person who happens to occupy two bodies. I've taught a great many pairs of friends. I have never seen anything like this. She finishes his sentences and he finishes her spells. I know, Sirius said. He was mending a bridle again. He was always mending something now, a man who had discovered late that his hands liked work. I've known since the first Saturday. The house knew before I did. He did not look up from the leather. It worries me a little if I'm honest with you, Mooney, not the closeness. The closeness is the best thing I've ever watched happen. What worries me is that they don't have a spare. Each of them has decided the other one is home. They're 10. If anything ever, he stopped himself, as he had trained himself to, because a man who has lost everyone he loved in one night learns not to finish certain sentences out loud, in case the house is listening. Never mind, look at them. Go on, look. When did you last see Hermione Granger lose an argument and enjoy it? They were, in fact, arguing. They were nearly always arguing, in the particular way of two people who trust each other so completely that being wrong in front of the other has stopped costing anything. Hermione argued because it was how she thought. Harry argued because he liked to watch her think, and the ward geometry, which had defeated grown wizards, was slowly, between the two of them, coming apart into something they could understand. The air training was a different matter, and Sirius took it seriously in a way he took almost nothing else, because he had seen what the family's power did to people who inherited it without being taught to fear it first. He began with the fear. Before I teach you a single thing about what the house can do, he told them, the winter they were both 10 in the long gallery under the tapestry, I'm going to teach you what it did. Because every family has a story it tells about itself, and ours is a lie, and the lie is stitched into that wall in letters a foot high. He pointed at the words along the bottom of the weave, Tauger's purr, always pure, that's what they told themselves they were protecting, pure blood. And in the name of that lie they murdered, they tortured, they married cousins until half of them were mad, they threw their own children on the fire, not metaphorically, look there and there, and there, every one of those burns is a person somebody in this family decided was worth less than a word. My cousin Bellatrix is in a cell right now for torturing two good people into madness in the name of exactly this. My brother Regulus died at 19 for it before he changed his mind. My own mother burned me off this wall for the crime of having a friend she disapproved of. This is what the power is for if you don't watch it. It's a tool that has spent 400 years being used to make the world smaller and crueler and more afraid. I'm going to put it in your hands, and before I do I want you to be frightened of it, both of you, exactly as frightened as it deserves, because the day you stop being frightened of it is the day it starts using you instead. Hermione, who had gone very still, said, then why give it to us at all if it's that dangerous? Why not just let it die with you? Because it won't die, Sirius said. That's the trap of it. Power like this doesn't vanish when good people refuse it. It just goes to whoever's willing to pick it up, and the people willing to pick up the power of the House of Black, if you two won't, are not people you want holding it. Bellatrix has a husband and cousins and a whole poisonous garden of relatives who would give their wand arms to be Lord Black. The only way to keep this power from being used the old way is for it to be held and used and understood by people who will use it the new way. That's you. That's the whole reason, not because you're owed it, because you can be trusted with it, and almost no one in the history of this family ever could. He looked at them both, 10 years old, grave in the lamplight. That's the only kind of inheritance worth having, not the kind you're given, the kind you're trusted with. Harry said slowly, working at it, so it's not a present, it's a job. It's a job, Sirius agreed. The hardest one there is, and you don't have to take it. I want to be very clear about that, both of you, and I'll keep being clear about it until you're grown and sick of hearing it. Nobody in this house will ever be burned off any wall for saying no. But if you say yes and you don't have to, and not today, then I'll teach you everything, and I'll teach you to be afraid of it, and I'll trust you with it, and I think between the two of you, you might just be the thing this family has been failing to produce for 700 years. A House of Black that's actually good. Wouldn't that be a joke on all of them? He nodded at the burned wall, the murdered names, the whole proud terrible tree. Wouldn't that be the best joke ever told? There was practical work too, and Sirius did not soften it, because the world the two of them were being handed was not soft. He taught them to defend themselves on the swept floor of the old ballroom with the shutters open to the moor, and he taught it the way Aurors were taught and not the way children were, because he had watched too many friends die of being taught the gentle version. The rule he drilled into them until they hated it was that a duel is not a contest of who knows the flashier curse. It is a contest of who is still standing, and the person still standing is nearly always the one who thought 2 moves further ahead. Hermione took to the theory of it at once and the practice of it not at all. At first, she could recite the counter to any curse before Sirius finished naming it, and then stand rooted while an actual jinx sailed past her ear, because knowing and doing lived in different rooms of her and had not yet been introduced. Harry was the reverse. He could not have told you the name of what he had just done, but his body moved before his mind did, ducking and turning and throwing up a shield a half-second before he consciously knew he needed one, and Sirius, watching him, saw James in it, the same maddening natural grace no amount of study could teach, and had to get on with the lesson quickly so as not to stand there staring. So Sirius put them back to back. He had them duel him together, 2 against 1, and told them the only way they would ever manage it was to stop being 2 duelists and become one, and it was Hermione who worked out how, because it was always Hermione who worked out how. She called the shots, reading Sirius's stance and naming the counter a half-beat before it was needed, and Harry executed them, his body obeying her mind faster than either of them could obey their own, so that between the two of them they had a reach and a speed and a foresight that neither owned alone. The first time they backed him into a corner of the ballroom and disarmed him clean, his own wand skittering across the boards to Hermione's outstretched hand while Harry's shield still hummed in the air between them. Sirius stood there with empty hands and no breath and laughed until he had to sit down on the floor, because they were 10 and 11, and they had just done a thing he had not managed against a grown wizard until he was 17. That, he told them, fetching his wand back, is the whole secret, and I've just given it to you for free. Apart, you're 2 clever children. Together, you're something nobody's worked out how to fight yet, because there isn't a word for it. Everything I teach you, everything the house gives you, it all comes down to that one thing. Stay together, fight as one, and there's no wizard alive who can take the pair of you. They learned the family magic slowly, and they learned it together, because Sirius refused to teach one of them anything he did not teach the other, which caused the first real crisis, because the family magic was blood magic, and Hermione, by the family's own reckoning, had the blood, and Harry did not. It was Hermione who raised it, of course, because Hermione raised everything. The wards read blacks, she said one evening, with her habit of laying a hard truth flat on the table where everyone could see it. I've been reading about it, the old defensive magic of a family seat. It's keyed to the bloodline, it recognizes the blood. I've got Yola, Harry hasn't got anything. If we ever really needed it, if the house ever had to defend us, it would defend me and not him, wouldn't it? She was not looking at Harry when she said it. She was looking at Sirius, and there was something fierce and frightened under the flat delivery, because she had worked out the shape of a future in which the magic that protected her would let her best friend die, and she found it unbearable and she wanted it fixed. Sirius put down his glass. You've been reading the wrong books, he said. Or rather, you've been reading the right books, written by the wrong people. Every text on family magic you'll find was written by someone who believed the lie, so of course they all say it reads blood, because blood was the only thing those people could imagine mattering. But I've stood in the wards of this house, Hermione. I felt them read me, and I'm telling you they don't read blood. They read, he searched for it, this thing he knew in his bones and had never had to say, belonging. They read who the house is for. Blood is usually a good guess at that, which is why the lie held so long, because most of the time the people a house is for are the people related to it. But it's a guess, not the truth. The truth underneath is older and it's stranger and it's better. The wards protect whoever the lord of the house has taken in and named his own. That's why they let me carry a Potter baby through the door of Grimmauld when every book you own says they shouldn't have. Because I named him mine in my heart and in the old binding at his christening, and the magic believed me over the books. He looked at Harry, who had gone quiet, as he did when something mattered too much to interrupt. The wards already know Harry. They've known him since he was 15 months old. If this house ever has to defend the two of you, it will not stop to check whose great-great-grandmother married a builder. I'd stake my life on it. In fact, and here his voice did the thing it did when he was about to hand them something enormous and pretend it was small, I'd like to stake all 3 of ours on it, because there's a way to make it certain, and it's time I told you about it. It's called the Heirs' right, and it's the most dangerous thing I'll ever ask you to do, and the most beautiful, and I'm not going to let you decide tonight. He told them about the right over the following weeks, in pieces, the way you feed a fire, because it was too large to hand over all at once. The right of recognition was older than the family's records, which went back to the conquest, which meant it was older than the family's cruelty, which was the thing that gave Sirius hope. In the beginning, before Towger's Pur, before the burnings, a house was a small, desperate thing, a handful of people in a hall in a hostile world, and the right had been the way a house claimed its own and bound its magic to their protection. A candidate came before the family seat in the family magic and gave blood freely and named themselves to the house, and the house, the accumulated will of 7 centuries of the dead, soaked into the stone, woven into the tapestry, alive in a way that no single spell was alive, reached out and read them. Not their blood, their truth, what they were all the way down, past the name and the story to the bare fact of the soul. And if the house found them true, found them genuinely of itself, genuinely willing, genuinely worthy of the terrible tool it was about to become in their hands, then it took them in and keyed its whole ancient defensive power to their protection, and made them in the fullest and oldest sense its heir. And if the house found them false, it cast them out, and the casting out could kill. That's the part I need you to understand, Sirius said, and it's why I won't let you say yes lightly. The right doesn't lie and it can't be fooled. If either of you came to it wanting the power for its own sake, wanting to be grand, wanting to be safe at someone else's expense, if there were rot in you, the way there was rot in Bellatrix, the way there was rot in nearly all of them, the house would find it, and it would not be gentle. People have died in this rite. Blacks have died in it, proud pure-blooded blacks who had the right blood and the wrong soul, and the family always said they died of the effort and buried them, and never admitted that the house had looked at its own true-born heir and found him wanting and thrown him back. That's the secret the purists never understood about their own magic. It was never on their side. It was only ever on the side of the true thing. They spent 400 years thinking it protected their blood, and all that time it was quietly disgusted with nearly all of them, and waiting. Waiting for what? Harry asked. For someone worth saying yes to, Sirius said. I think it's been waiting a very long time. They took a year to decide, and Sirius never once hurried them, and the year was the making of them. Because you cannot spend a year weighing whether you are worthy to be trusted with a terrible power without becoming, in the weighing, a little more worthy of it. They read everything. Hermione read the theory until she could have lectured on it, and then read the histories of everyone who had died in the rite, and made herself understand exactly what rot the house had found in each of them, and checked herself against it ruthlessly as she checked everything, and did not like some of what she found, the pride, the wanting to be best, the old lonely need to be the cleverest in the room, and worked on it quietly all year. Because she had decided the house would not find that in her when the time came. And Harry, who did not think in theory, spent the year on the moor and in the paddock, and in the long conversations he had with Sirius while they mended things, working out in his slow, sure way, whether he wanted this because it was right or because he was afraid of what would happen to Hermione if he didn't have the power to stand beside her. He decided it was some of both, and told Sirius so, honestly, and Sirius said that was the truest answer anyone had ever given him, and probably the reason the house would take him. Andromeda came when they had nearly decided, and she took the two children out onto the moor alone, away from Sirius, and told them the thing she had never told anyone, which was that she had been offered the right herself at 17 by her grandfather before she was burned off the wall, and had turned it down because she had already met Ted and known she was leaving, and had not wanted to bind herself to a house she was about to break with. I don't regret it, she told them in her blunt way, the wind pulling at her dark hair. I got Ted and I got Dora and I got a life the family would have strangled, but I'll tell you what I've wondered all these years. I've wondered what the house would have found in me, whether it would have taken me. I like to think it would. I like to think the old magic was on my side even when the family wasn't. She looked at them, these two solemn children who were about to do the thing she had refused. So do it right if you do it. Do it for the house the family should have been, not the one it was. And know that some of us who got burned off the wall will be cheering you on from the wrong side of the fire. They said yes together on a night in June at the long table, and Sirius poured himself a very large drink and did not touch it, and set a date, and the date was the summer solstice, because the rite was strongest when the light was longest, and because he did not say this part aloud until later. The star Sirius, his star, their guardian star, would stand at its own particular place in the sky that night. And he wanted every scrap of old luck the heavens would lend him for the most frightening thing he had ever agreed to let two children he loved walk into. The night of the rite, Blackthorn Hall was lit from cellar to chimney, every lamp, every candle, because the family magic did not like the dark, and neither, that night, did Sirius. He had cleared the long gallery. The tapestry hung the length of it, and before the tapestry he had drawn back the great flagstone that no one but the Lord could lift, the hearthstone of the original hall, the oldest stone in the building, laid 7 centuries ago over something the first blacks had buried there, and the family had forgotten, and only the magic remembered. Beneath the stone was bare earth, black and old, and set into the earth was a shallow basin of worn silver, and around it the flags were carved with the whole branching tree of the family in miniature, every name ending in a blank ring of stone where new names could be cut. Remus was there, and Andromeda, because the rite required witnesses of the blood, and because Sirius wanted people he loved in the room. The children came in barefoot, as the old rite required, in plain undyed linen, and they were 10 and 11 now. Hermione had turned 11 in the autumn. Harry would turn 11 in July, and they looked very small in the great lit gallery and very unafraid, which frightened Sirius more than anything because he was afraid enough for all of them. Last time, he said, kneeling to their level, his voice low. You can walk out of this room right now, and I will love you exactly the same, and the house will still protect you as far as it can, and nothing will be lost. Nobody has ever thought less of anyone for refusing the rite. Say the word and we go and have cocoa and never speak of it again. We're not going to have cocoa, Hermione said, and her chin was up, and her voice did not shake, though her bare feet must have been cold on the old stone. We decided, we're ready. Stop trying to give us a way out, Sirius. It's not kind, it's just you being frightened, and we've talked about that. You're allowed to be frightened, but you're not allowed to make it our job to manage. Sirius looked at her, this 11-year-old who had walked into his life 2 years ago with a book held like a shield, and who was now telling him, accurately and without mercy, exactly what he was doing and why, and he decided not for the first time that Gola Black's blood had come back into the world with interest. "All right," he said, "all right, then here's what happens. You each cut your own hand, your own, no one does it for you. The house needs the offering freely given, and you let your blood fall into the basin. And then you name yourselves to the house out loud the words I taught you, and then," his voice roughened, "then it reads you. And it will not be gentle, but it will not be cruel either unless it finds cruelty. It'll feel like the whole weight of 700 years of the dead looking straight at the middle of you. Don't fight it, don't hide anything from it. It'll find whatever you hide, and it'll trust you less for the hiding. Let it see all of you, the good and the frightened and the parts you don't like. That's the whole secret. The house doesn't want you perfect, it wants you true." He stood. He put one hand on each of their heads briefly, the closest he could come to a blessing. "Harry first, because you're the one the books say shouldn't be able to do this at all, and I want the house to say them wrong right at the start." Harry stepped up to the basin. He took the old silver knife, and he did not hesitate, which Sirius would remember, and he drew it across his own palm and let his blood fall 3 slow drops into the worn silver, and he lifted his head to the great dark weight of the tapestry in the house behind it, and he said the words in a voice that started uneven and steadied as it went. "I am Harry James Potter. I was given to this house in love, and I was taken in love, and I have been made welcome here every day of my life that I can remember. I don't have your blood, I know that. I've got my mother's blood and my father's, and they died to keep me, and I won't dishonor them by pretending to be something I'm not, not even to you. So I'm not asking you to take me for a Black, I'm asking you to take me for what I am. Sirius Black named me his own, and I've chosen him back every day on purpose. That's enough for you, then I'll serve this house with everything I've got, and I'll never once use what you give me the way your children used it before, and I'll spend my whole life making the name mean something better. And if it's not enough," his voice held, "then I'll walk out of here a Potter, and I'll still love this family, and I won't be sorry I asked." For a long moment nothing happened, and Sirius stopped breathing, and the lamps burned, and the tapestry hung dark and still, and then the house woke. It came up out of the old stone the way the tide comes up a beach in the dark, without a sound, and everywhere at once. The blood in the silver basin caught a light that had no source and burned a deep steady gold, and the light ran out from the basin along the carved lines of the family tree in the floor, every branch of it lighting at once, 7 centuries of names glowing up cold and gold out of the stone. And then it ran up the wall into the tapestry, and the whole vast weave came alive, 12 feet of it, every stitched name lifting into light, the whole tree burning gold on green from the conquest to the present day. And above it, through the charmed ceiling, through the roof, the real sky answered, and the stars the Blacks had named their children for came out hard and bright, though it was not yet full dark, and the brightest of them all, low in the south, the dog star, blazed. And the weight of it turned on Harry. Sirius could feel it, standing 3 feet away, the attention of the dead, 700 years of a family looking through the stone and the cloth and the light at one barefoot 11-year-old boy who had told them the truth. It was not gentle. Harry's face went white and his knees shook, and Andromeda made a small sound and started forward, and Sirius caught her arm, because you could not interrupt it, because to interrupt it now would kill him surer than letting it finish. Harry stood in the gold light with the whole house reading him to the bone, and he did not fight it, and he did not hide, and Sirius watched his son let 7 centuries of the dead look at every frightened true thing inside him. The grief for parents he couldn't remember, the fear of losing Hermione, the private ridiculous weight of being the boy who lived, the plain stubborn goodness underneath all of it, and the house looked, and the house knew him, and the house, which had thrown its own trueborn children back into their graves for the rot it found in them, looked at a boy with none of its blood and all of its heart, and said yes. The gold light gathered itself and sank into Harry like water into ground, and he staggered, and Sirius caught him, and Harry looked up with his mother's green eyes gone bright and enormous and said in a small, wondering voice, "It said yes, it's Sirius, it likes me. It actually likes me," and Sirius, holding him up, could not speak at all. In the floor, in the blank ring of stone that had waited for new names, letters were cutting themselves, gold-hot, into the old gray flag, Harry James Potter, heir of the House of Black. And in the tapestry on the wall, high on the main line, in a place of honor that no adoption had ever been given in 400 years, a new name was stitching itself in living gold beside the burned scar where Sirius's own name had been struck out, so that the burned son and the chosen son sat side by side on the family tree at last, and the house had done it itself without a wand because it wanted to. Then it was Hermione's turn, and the gallery was still full of gold, and she was shaking, not with fear but with the effort of not weeping at what she had just watched, and Sirius put his hand on her shoulder and said, you saw it can be done. Now go and let it see you." And Hermione Granger, who was Gola Black's blood come home after 200 years, stepped up to the basin and took the knife and cut her own hand and let her blood fall gold into the silver, and lifted her chin to the burning house and said her name. "I am Hermione Jean Granger," she said, clear and fierce and unafraid, "and I am Gola's. You burned her off your wall 200 years ago because she loved a Muggle, and you were wrong, and I am what you get for being wrong, her blood back in a girl you'd have called mudblood and thrown on the fire. I'm not going to pretend to forgive you for what you did to her, but I've read everything you ever were, all of it, the good and the rot, and I've decided I'd rather stay and change you than walk away and let you go on being the worst thing in the world. So look at me, look all the way. I'm proud and I want to be the cleverest, and I'm frightened of not being enough, and I love these people more than I have words for, and if that's a soul you can use, then take me, and I'll never let this house be Towger's purr again as long as I live. And if it isn't, if you're still the thing that burned her, then throw me back and I'll know and I'll grieve and I'll leave and I'll take Harry with me, because wherever he is, that's my house now, not you." And the whole gallery blazed white. It was different for her, and Sirius understood why, even as it happened, because Hermione was blood, was the family's own, returning after the family had tried to unmake her. And when the house reached for her, it reached the whole way, hungry, 200 years of a stolen daughter's line coming home at once. The gold went white and the white went through her, and Hermione stood in the center of the light with her arms flung wide and her face turned up and her hair lifting in a wind that did not exist. And the burned scar in the tapestry that had been Iola's, the 200-year wound, the round black nothing where a daughter had been unmade, filled at last, filled and closed and healed, the gold flooding into it and knitting the old weave whole. Iola Black writing itself back across the mended branch in letters that would never again be burned, and below it, bright and new, Hermione Jean Granger, heir of the House of Black, the line come home, the wound closed, the lie undone. When it faded, when the stars dimmed back to their proper June faintness, and the tapestry stilled, and the last gold sank out of the carved floor into the old black earth, the two children were left standing in the ordinary lamplight, hand in hand, having reached for each other somewhere in the middle of it without either of them deciding to, and there were 3 new names cut gold into the stone of Blackthorn Hall, where there had been one blank ring an hour before. Because the house had done one more thing at the very end that Sirius had not known it could do, that no record of the rite had ever described, that made Andromeda put her hand over her mouth and Remus sit down slowly on the gallery bench. Between the two children's names joining them, the stone had cut a third mark, not a name but a binding, the old rune the first Blacks had used for a thing held in common and defended as one, and the wards of Blackthorn Hall, when Sirius reached out that night to feel them, as he did every night, had rewoven themselves around a new center, and the new center was not a person. It was the two of them together, the pair, the thing that was larger than either. The house had been asked to take 2 heirs. And the house, in its ancient wordless wisdom, had looked at the 2 children and seen what Sirius had seen on the first Saturday and Remus had named in the library doorway, one alarming person in 2 bodies, and had decided of its own will that it would not choose between them, and would not merely accept them side by side. It had bound them. It had made them, in the oldest law of the house, a single heir in 2 hearts, so that from that night the magic of the House of Black would defend the one exactly as fiercely as the other forever, and would no more let Harry come to harm than it would let Hermione, because it had stopped being able to tell where the one of them ended and the other began. Sirius knelt on the old stone between his 2 children and gathered them both in, and none of the 3 of them said anything for a long time, and the house, satisfied, went back to sleep in its foundations, warm now and full and home. The world found out within the month, because the world always found out. There was no hiding a rite of that magnitude. The old magic had lit up the wards of a dozen sleeping properties across Britain, every dormant scrap of Black family magic flaring at once as the house renewed itself, and the goblins felt it in the vaults, and the ministry's instruments felt it, and by August the Daily Prophet had the story or a mangled half of it, and the headline that Sirius kept and framed and hung in the downstairs loo where it belonged read: Black Names 2 Heirs, Potter boy and Muggle-born girl in ancient rite, Pureblood families outraged. The children met the edge of it for the first time that same August in Diagon Alley, where Sirius took them for ice cream and a look at the brooms, and a witch in expensive robes stopped dead in the middle of the street and looked at Hermione the way you look at something on the sole of your shoe, and said to her companion, loudly enough to carry, that it was a disgrace, that the old magic had been fouled. That she did not know what the world was coming to when a common mudblood could be paraded through the alley as though she had a right to a name. Hermione went still and pale and her chin came up, and Sirius drew breath to end the woman's afternoon and possibly her week, and Harry got there first. He stepped without hurry between Hermione and the witch, and he looked up at the woman with his mother's green eyes very steady, and he said in a voice that carried just as well, "She's heir of the House of Black." The magic chose her itself. It looked at her and it looked at you and it chose her. If you've a complaint, it's not with us. It's with 700 years of the dead, and they've already decided, and they decided against you. And he took Hermione's hand and walked her on toward the ice cream, unhurried, an 11-year-old escorting his best friend past a grown woman he had just dismantled without raising his voice. And Sirius followed after them, thinking that he had not taught Harry to do that no one had taught Harry to do that it had simply come up out of him, the same way the shield charms did, faster than thought, exactly when it was needed. They were outraged. Sirius had expected outrage and got it in full measure, and he read the howlers and the anonymous letters and the sniffing columns with a species of grim enjoyment, because every furious word of it was proof that he had done the thing right. That the boy who lived was heir to the House of Black was scandal enough. The old families had spent 9 years assuming they would get their hands on Harry Potter eventually, would marry him in or buy him in or shape him to their liking, and here was Sirius Black shutting that door forever. But that he had named, beside the Potter boy, a Muggle-born girl, had performed the most sacred pure-blood rite in Britain to bind a mudblood into the very heart of a noble house, and worse, that the rite had worked, that the old magic itself had accepted her, had by every account blazed brighter for her than it had in living memory, that was not scandal. That was heresy. That was the whole foundation of blood purity, the doctrine that the old magic belonged to the old blood, refuted in a single night by the old magic itself. If a Muggle-born could be heir of the House of Black, confirmed by the family's own ancient right, then the purists had been lying to themselves for 400 years about the one thing they were most certain of, and some of them would rather see the children dead than let that stand. Sirius knew it. He had always known it. It was, in a sense, the whole point. The letter came in September on heavy cream parchment, sealed with a green wax serpent, in a hand Sirius knew well and had hoped to have finished with. It was very short and very polite, and it was the politeness that told him the war had begun. Cousin Sirius, I read of your recent innovation with the interest you would expect. The family has been diminished by our late troubles, and it does the heart good to see the line continue in whatever form. I wonder whether you might do me the honor of receiving me, that we might discuss the future of the house to which we both, after all, belong. Narcissa sends her regards. Draco, you may be pleased to hear, will start Hogwarts the same year as your heirs. Your devoted cousin, Lucius Malfoy. Sirius read it twice, standing at the kitchen window while the two children argued happily over a cauldron behind him about whether a stirring charm counted as cheating, and he looked out at the white blackthorn hedge going gold at the tips with the turn of the year, and he thought about Lucius Malfoy, who had married Narcissa Black, who had spent the war on the right side of no one and the winning side of everyone, who had bought his way out of Azkaban with gold and a story about being Imperius that not one person believed and not one person could disprove, and who had just written the word heirs with 3 dots in front of it that carried more contempt than any howler in the pile. Lucius did not want to discuss the future of the house. Lucius wanted the house. Lucius had spent 9 years waiting for the last unburnt Black Lord to drink himself to death or die on some order fool's errand, at which point the lordship would pass, by the old law, to the nearest suitable blood, and the nearest suitable blood, with Bellatrix in Azkaban and Andromeda burned off the wall, was Narcissa Malfoy and her son. Lucius had been raising Draco to be Lord Black. And Sirius had just, in a single night of gold and stars, named 2 heirs of his own, one of them a Muggle-born girl, and slammed that door and locked it and thrown the key into the old black earth under the hearthstone. Padfoot, Harry had come up beside him, small and warm, catching the change in the room as he always did. Who's it from? Sirius folded the letter and put it in his pocket over his heart, next to James's cracked glasses, where he kept the things that mattered and the things that were dangerous, which were, he had found, so often the same things. Family, he said, and put his hand on the back of Harry's neck and turned him gently back toward the cauldron and the girl and the warm, bright, ordinary evening. Nothing you need to worry about tonight. Go on. Tell Hermione a stirring charm is absolutely cheating. I want to watch her win the argument anyway. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The claim Lucius Malfoy arrived at Blackthorn Hall by the front gate on foot, alone, which was itself a message, because a man who wants you to know he is not afraid of your wards walks up to them slowly and lets them read him and waits, empty-handed, to be admitted. Sirius admitted him. He had thought about not admitting him for exactly as long as it took to understand that refusing to meet Lucius would tell Lucius he was frightened, and a frightened man is a man you can move. So he received his cousin's husband in the good drawing-room, the one with the long windows over the moor, and had Creature bring tea in the second-best service, which was another message, and sent the children up to the library with instructions to stay there, and he knew perfectly well, to listen at the top of the stairs, because he had stopped being able to keep them out of anything that concerned them and had mostly stopped trying. Cousin Sirius, Lucius said, and inclined his head, the precise number of degrees owed by a guest to a host of equal rank and not 1 degree more. He was immaculate, silver hair, black robes cut in Paris, a cane he did not need with a serpent's head that Sirius knew concealed a wand. You look well, fatherhood suits you, who could have imagined it? Sit down, Lucius, Sirius said. You've come a long way to threaten me, and the tea's getting cold, and I'd hate for you to have to do it standing up. The pale eyes moved over him, unhurried, and something in them approved, the way a duelist approves of an opponent who does not waste the first exchange on pleasantries. Lucius sat. He arranged his cane across his knees. He looked out the long window at the moor, at the white blackthorn, at the two Thestrals grazing in the far paddock that he could not see and would not have admitted to if he could. "I have come," he said, "to be reasonable. I understand that will disappoint you. You would prefer me to bluster so that you might have the pleasure of throwing me out, but I am not going to bluster, Sirius. I am going to be so reasonable that you will find it very difficult indeed, and you will hate me for it more than you would for any threat, and you will be right too." He turned from the window. "You have made a mistake, a large one. And because we are family, and because I am, whatever you believe, not without sentiment, I have come to give you the chance to unmake it before others less sentimental than I unmake it for you, and for your children in ways you will like a great deal less." "Go on," Sirius said. "You've clearly rehearsed." "The Potter boy I can almost forgive," Lucius said, ignoring this. "Sentiment again. He is your dead friend's son. You have raised him. You wish to leave him something. That he is not of the blood is irregular, but there is precedent for a lord naming an heir of the half-blood in extremity, and the house has, remarkably, accepted him, and I am a practical man. I can find a way to live with the Potter boy as your heir." The pale gaze sharpened. "But the girl, Sirius, the girl is not a mistake of sentiment. The girl is an act of war. You have taken the most sacred instrument our family possesses, the right that confirms the blood, and you have used it to declare before the whole of magical Britain that blood does not matter. That a Muggle-born, forgive the word, I use it as they will use it, not as I would. A mudblood can stand in the heart of a noble and ancient house and be confirmed by its own ancient magic. Do you understand what you have done? You have not adopted a child. You have detonated the single idea on which 24 families have built 400 years of their identity. And those families are going to respond. They have to. You have left them no choice. If a mudblood can be heir of the House of Black, then everything they are is a lie, and men will do a great deal to avoid being told they are a lie." "I know exactly what I've done," Sirius said. "I did it on purpose. You've come a long way to tell me my own plan back to me." "I have come," Lucius said, "to tell you it will not stand." He set down his tea untouched. "Here is what is going to happen, and I tell you plainly because I would rather you surrendered than suffered. There will be a challenge before the Wisengamot, not from me. I am far too fond of you, but from parties I need not name, who will petition the assembly to rule on whether the rite you performed was lawful. They will argue that the girl's claim rests on a line lawfully struck from the family 2 centuries ago, Viola's line, burned off the tapestry by due family right, and that no burning has ever in the history of any house been reversed, and that a claim founded on a legally dead branch is void. They will argue that you personally are unfit, a man once accused of the very murders whose orphan you now raise, a man who keeps a werewolf under the same roof as 2 children, a man whose judgment in the matter of Peter Pettigrew, whatever the court found, remains a matter of public doubt. They will argue that the lordship of the House of Black is too great a power to rest in the hands of a man who would use it so recklessly, and they will petition for a regency or a reversion or an examination of your fitness. And they will lose, Sirius, most of it. You have Dumbledore and you have gold and you have Ogden, and the right was, curse it, real. You will win in the Wisengamot." He paused. "And then the people I did not name will stop using the Wisengamot. And that is the part I have really come to warn you about, because I do not want it and I cannot stop it, and neither can you once it begins." Sirius had gone very still. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you'll fail in the courts, and when you fail, someone's going to come for my children in the dark, and you want it on the record that you warned me, so that when it happens, your hands look clean." "My hands are clean," Lucius said, and for the first time something moved in the pale face that was not calculation. "That is precisely the problem, Sirius, and you are too clever not to have seen it. I married the last free black daughter. My son is, until your little ceremony, the nearest thing the house had to an heir of the blood. I stand to gain the most, and I have done the least, and I am telling you to your face that I do not want your children harmed, and you cannot know whether to believe me, and neither, if I am honest, can either are those in my wife's family. Her sister has friends, Sirius, friends who are not in Azkaban, friends who have spent 9 years waiting for a cause, who look at what you have done and see not a scandal, but a desecration. And a desecration to such men may be answered in blood without dishonor. I cannot control them, I am not sure anyone can. I have come to tell you that they are coming, and to offer you the only exit I can, dissolve the girl's claim. Send her back to her dentist's with a fortune and a fond memory. Keep the Potter boy. Give the old families the one concession that lets them save face, and I will spend everything I have keeping the dogs off your door. Refuse, and I cannot answer for what walks up to this gate some night when I am nowhere near it." The room was quiet. Out on the moor a curlew called, that long falling note, and somewhere above them, at the top of the stairs, 2 children were listening and not moving and not breathing. "Get out of my house," Sirius said. He said it without heat, which was worse than heat, and Lucius understood it and rose and gathered his cane. I told her you would say that, he said. Narcissa. She said he will never give up the girl. He is exactly the sort of fool who dies for a principle. It runs in the disowned side of the family. She was fond of you once, before. He moved to the door unhurried and paused there and looked back, and there was something almost like regret in it, and Sirius could not tell whether that made it better or worse. For what it is worth, cousin, and it is worth nothing, I know. I think what you have built here is rather fine. That is the tragedy of it. The world I belong to cannot allow a fine thing to exist if it proves the world wrong. Guard your gate, guard your children. And when it comes, remember that I told you, and that I was sorry, and that being sorry changed nothing, because it never does. He walked back down the long path in the September light alone, and the wards let him out, and Sirius stood at the long window and watched him go until he reached the boundary and turned on the spot and vanished, and only then did he let himself put both hands flat on the windowsill and lean on them, because his knees had decided now that the danger was out of the room, that they had been frightened all along. 2 pairs of feet came down the stairs behind him. He did not turn. You heard all of it, he said. All of it, Hermione said. Her voice was steady in the way that cost her something. He wants you to send me away. He wants me to hand him a victory dressed up as a mercy, Sirius said, and turned and looked at the 2 of them standing at the foot of the stairs, 11 years old, pale and grave and holding hands, and he crossed the room and knelt in front of them as he did when the thing he had to say was too important to say from up there. Listen to me. Both of you, I am not sending anyone anywhere. Hermione, you are my heir and my daughter in every way that matters, and the magic of this house loves you exactly as much as it loves Harry, which is more than it has loved anyone in 700 years, and I would sooner give Lucius Malfoy my own wand hand than give him you. That is not in question. That was never in question. You understand me. That door is closed and locked, and the key is under the hearthstone with everything else that matters. Hermione looked at him, and her chin was up, and she said the thing she had clearly worked out on the stairs, because she worked everything out always, even the unbearable things. But if I stay, people come for us in the dark. He said, your cousin's friends, that's the price of me staying. That other people, that you and Harry, she could not finish it. It was the one calculation she could not make come out right, the one where the cost of her belonging was paid by the people she loved, and Sirius saw her trying to solve it the only way she knew, by subtracting herself, and he took her by the shoulders. No, he said, now you listen, because this is the most important thing I will ever teach you, and it's not in any book. The people who come in the dark, they don't come because you stayed. They come because they've decided that a girl like you doesn't get to exist. Leave, you don't stop them, you just teach them it works. You teach them that if they frighten us enough, we'll give them what they want, and then they'll want the next thing and the next, and there's no bottom to it, Hermione, there's never any bottom to it. You give a bully your lunch and he takes your lunch forever. The only way to stop them is to be unfrightenable, to stand in your own house with your own family and say, here I am not leaving, do your worst, and discover you cannot be moved. That's not me being brave for a principle, whatever Lucius thinks. That's the actual, practical, only way this ends with all of us alive. We don't win by making ourselves smaller until there's nothing left to attack. We win by being impossible to take. Harry, who had not said anything, who had been watching Sirius's face with the particular attention he gave to the things that mattered most, spoke up then, quietly. Then we should get ready, he said, properly, not just wait for them. If they're coming, we should know when and how and be ready when they get here. And we should find out what Lucius didn't tell us, because he told us a lot, Padfoot, more than he meant to, I think. But there's a thing he wants that he didn't say. People always leave out the thing they want most. He kept saying he couldn't stop them, he couldn't control them, his hands were clean. He said it about 4 times. He wants us to think he's just a warning, but he came here himself. He walked up to the gate himself, alone. Men who are just warnings send owls. He looked up at Sirius. He wanted to see the house, he wanted to see the wards, he wanted to see us. He was scouting, wasn't he? Sirius looked at his son, 11 years old, who had just seen the thing that Sirius, with all his years, had felt but not named. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, I think he was, which means the attack isn't a maybe. It's a plan, and it's far enough along that he's already walking the ground. He stood. Something had settled in him the way it settled before a fight, cold and clear and almost restful. All right then, Harry's right. We stop waiting to be hit. Hermione, I need you in the library, not the family magic shelf. The law shelf, the old one, the Wisengamot statutes and the family charters, everything on inheritance and challenge and the rights of a lord. If Lucius is going to come at us through the old law, I want to know the old law better than he does before he opens his mouth. You're better at that than anyone alive, including me. Can you do it? I've already started, Hermione said. I started 3 days ago when his letter came. I've read 40 years of Wisengamot rulings on contested inheritance. I've got a list. Her chin came up another degree. I was going to tell you at dinner. I didn't want you to worry until I had something worth worrying you with. Sirius looked at her for a moment. Gola, he said, would have been so proud of you it would have frightened her. Go on, get your list. We start tonight. They started that night, and they did not stop for a month, and the shape of the war revealed itself slowly, the way the shape of a coastline reveals itself out of fog. Sirius turned Blackthorn Hall into a thing that looked, to anyone flying over it, exactly like a quiet house on a moor, and was underneath a fortress waking up. He did not do it with alarms and iron, he did it with the old magic, because the old magic was the one advantage no amount of Malfoy gold could buy. He took the two children down into the cellar where the foundation stone lay, and he taught them the wards as his own grandfather had refused to teach him, hand over hand, blood to stone, and he found that with the two of them keyed to the house as its bound heirs, he could do things with the defenses that no single lord had managed in centuries. Hermione learned the geometry of the wards as she learned everything completely, and then began to improve them, which should have been impossible and was merely difficult. She found 3 weaknesses in a scheme of protection 400 years old and closed 2 of them in a week and left the third open on purpose, because, she explained with the cold practicality that Sirius had come to rely on, an attacker needed to believe there was a way in, or he would simply bring the whole hillside down from a distance, and a known gap you controlled was worth more than a perfect wall you didn't. Sirius looked at his 11-year-old daughter explaining defensive strategy to him, and thought that Moody would have adopted her on the spot. Harry did not build the wards, Harry walked them. He went over every foot of the boundary inside and out in the cold October light, learning the ground as he learned everything with his body, so that if it ever came to fight in the dark he would know without thinking where the wall dipped and where the gorse would slow a man and where the paddock fence would turn an ankle. He drilled with Sirius and with Remus until the shield charm came before the fear and the disarming came before the anger, and he drilled with Hermione most of all, the two of them back to back on the swept ballroom floor, until the thing they became together, the single fighter in 2 bodies, was faster and surer than anything Sirius could throw at them. Andromeda moved into the East Wing with Ted, without being asked, arriving one evening with 3 trunks and the flat announcement that she had not spent 17 years learning to hate her family only to sit in Tooting, while what was left of it made war on the 2 best children it had ever produced. Moody came twice and stumped the boundary with his magical eye spinning, and pronounced the wards the best civilian work he had seen, and the household the most sensibly frightened, which from Alastair Moody was a benediction. The Grangers came, and Sirius sat Robert and Helen down at the long table and told them the truth, all of it, the box and the right and Bellatrix and the danger, because he had promised them from the start that he would never manage them, and he watched 2 ordinary brave muggles decide without much fuss that their daughter's family was their family, and that they would learn the flu alarm and the safe word and the emergency portkey Sirius pressed into their hands, and that they were not going anywhere either. By the end of the month, Blackthorn Hall held 9 people who had all, in their different ways, decided the same thing, which was that whatever came up the hill would have to come through every one of them, and that not one of them intended to be the first to step aside. It went as Lucius had said it would go at first, exactly as he had said, which Sirius found more menacing than any surprise, because a man who can predict his own faction's moves so precisely is a man who wrote them. The challenge came before the Wisengamot in October, filed not by Malfoy but by an ancient wizard named Nott and a handful of the old families, and it argued precisely the points Lucius had listed, in precisely the order, so that Sirius sat in the plum-robed tears listening to his cousin's script read aloud in another man's mouth. He had brought the children over Ogden's objection, because he had decided that the wizarding world was going to look at his heirs and see 2 human beings and not 2 scandals, and the only way to make it do that was to put them in the room. So Harry and Hermione sat in the visitors' gallery in their good robes, straight-backed, silent, and old Nott got to his feet and called them a desecration to their faces, and neither of them moved, and Sirius watched half the assembly watch the 2 grave children absorb the insult without flinching, and knew the 2 children were doing more for their own cause by sitting still than Ogden could do in a day of argument. Nott's case was elegant, and it was wrong, and Ogden took it apart in the order it had been built. The charge that Sirius was unfit fell first, because Dumbledore rose unasked and reminded the assembly in 9 quiet sentences that he had personally witnessed the christening binding, personally testified at the trial, and personally staked his judgment on Sirius Black 9 years ago, and had watched that judgment vindicated every year since. And there were not 5 people in Britain who would call Albus Dumbledore a poor judge of character to his face. The charge about the werewolf died the moment Ogden read into the record that the werewolf in question held 3 more NEWTs than the wizard who had raised the objection, and asked mildly whether the assembly wished to establish that a man's education counted for nothing against an affliction he had contracted at the age of 4. The tears shifted, uncomfortable, and Nott's second point sank without a vote. But the heart of it was the girl's claim, and that was where Hermione won the case, though she never left the gallery. Nott argued that Ola's line had been lawfully struck from the family 2 centuries before, that no burning had ever in the history of any house been reversed, and that a claim founded on a legally dead branch was void in the eyes of any court. It was a strong argument. It was, in fact, the only strong argument they had left. And Ogden answered it by rising and unrolling a parchment, and reading into the record a ruling from 1612 that no advocate had cited in 300 years, which Hermione had found in her month among the old charters, buried in a dispute over the House of Gaunt. The case of a squib line restored to a house by the acclamation of that house's own family magic, and the principle the Wisengamot had established there and never since overturned. That the magic of a house is the final authority on the membership of that house, superior to any burning, any charter, any decree of the living, because the house is older than all of them and answers to none of them. Ogden let the words hang in the stone chamber. Then he said simply that the old magic of the House of Black had accepted Hermione Granger before witnesses, blindingly, more brightly than in living memory, and that if any wizard in the chamber wished to stand and argue that a 200-year-old wand burn overruled the living will of a 700-year-old house, he was welcome to try, and Ogden would be fascinated to hear how he proposed to make the house agree. No one stood. Old Knot sat down looking as though he had swallowed something, and the Wisengamot, which contained a great many people who did not love blood purity but had been afraid to say so, felt the wind change and changed with it, and the challenge was dismissed by a margin that grew wider the longer the vote went on, as the timid discovered they had company. But Sirius did not celebrate because he had been watching the other side of the room, where Lucius Malfoy sat as a mere observer, taking no part, and Lucius had not looked worried when his faction lost. Lucius had looked, if anything, satisfied, and a man who is satisfied to lose is a man who was never really trying to win, and Sirius went home from that first victory more frightened than he had gone to it, and did not sleep, and was proved right within the week. There was one other thing from that day that Sirius did not understand until much later. As the tears emptied, Narcissa Malfoy had been waiting in the corridor outside, pale and straight and gray, and she had not spoken to Sirius, but she had looked for one long moment at the two children walking between him and Andromeda, at Hermione especially, and something had crossed her face that did not belong on a Malfoy in a public place. Andromeda had stopped. Two sisters had looked at each other across a distance of 20 years in one burned name, and Narcissa had said very low, "You look well, Dromeda," and Andromeda had said, "You look tired, Sissy," and that had been all, except that as they passed, Narcissa's gloved hand had brushed her sister's, and left in it a scrap of folded paper, and walked on without a backward glance. The paper, when Andromeda opened it in the corridor, held 4 words in Narcissa's fine hand: "Do not trust November." Nothing else, no signature. A sister's warning, or trap dressed as one, from a woman married to the enemy and born to the same mother as the madwoman in the cell, and there was no way to know which, and Andromeda had folded it away and shown it to no one but Sirius. And the two of them had understood that somewhere on the other side of the war there was at least one Black who could not entirely make herself want what her family wanted, and that this was either their best hope or their worst danger. And that November was 3 weeks away. The gift arrived on a Tuesday. It came by a hired owl from a delivery house in Nocturne Alley that took no names, addressed to Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, heirs of the House of Black, in a hand that had been disguised, wrapped in green paper, a flat wooden box of old black wood with the black arms inlaid in silver on the lid, and a card that read only, "A gift for the new heirs from those who honor the old ways. Wear them proudly." Harry reached for it because it had his name on it, and Creature screamed. The elf came across the kitchen faster than Sirius had ever seen him move, on his ancient bandy legs, and threw himself bodily between Harry and the box, his great eyes stretched wide with terror, and cried out in a voice cracked with 100 years of loyalty pointed, at last, the right way: "No. No, young master must not touch. Creature knows this box. Creature knows the smell of it. It is from the old mistress's own cabinet, the black cabinet, the cursed things. Master Regulus told Creature never to touch the black cabinet. Do not open it, do not, it is death, it is the old death, it is meant for the blood of the house, and it will know young master's blood, and it will not let go." Everyone in the kitchen had gone still. Sirius put out his arm and moved both children behind him without taking his eyes off the box. "Creature," he said, very calm, very careful, the way you speak near something that might go off. "Creature, look at me, you know what this is." "Creature knows," the elf whispered, trembling, his eyes fixed on the green paper. "It is a hand of Glory's cousin. It is worse. It is the binding of the blood. The old families made them long ago, before the ministry, to catch the heirs of enemies. A gift that cannot be refused, jewelry, a ring or a chain, and when the blood of the house puts it on, the elf shuddered, it binds. It fills the wearer with the will of the one who sent it. It makes the heir of one house into the puppet of another, and there is no taking it off. It grows into the hand, into the heart, and the child that wears it is gone, and only the sender is left, looking out of the child's eyes. Master Regulus's own grandmother sent one to a Pruett girl long ago. There was no Pruett girl after, only the box, sent back empty, and the family that received it too proud to say what had become of their daughter." Hermione had gone white. "It's keyed to the blood of the house," she said, working it out even now, even frightened, because it was how she survived being frightened. That's why it's addressed to us. It wouldn't work on Sirius. He's the Lord. He's too strong. The wards read him as their own master. But we're the heirs, new, bound in, but not the master. Her voice caught, we're the soft part of the house. That's what he wanted from the visit. He wasn't scouting the wards. He was checking that the right had really taken. He needed to know we were properly bound to the house before he sent something that only works on someone bound to the house. He made you prove it to him. And you did. We did. We showed him exactly where we were soft. Sirius looked at the box and then at the two children and then at the ancient house elf who had just saved both their lives, and something in him that had been merely afraid became, in that moment, something colder and more dangerous and far more useful. Creature, he said, can you destroy it safely without any of us touching it? Creature can, the elf said, drawing himself up with a dignity Sirius had never once granted him and would never again forget to. Creature knows the old fire that unmakes the old things. Master Regulus taught Creature at the end when Master Regulus was learning to unmake such things himself. The great eyes filled. Creature would have failed him. Creature could not destroy the thing Master Regulus died to find, but Creature will not fail the young masters. Creature will not fail this house again. And Sirius, who had spent his boyhood despising this Creature, and half his fatherhood learning not to, knelt down on the kitchen flags in front of Creature the house elf and said quietly so the elf would know he meant it, "You have never failed this house, Creature. This house failed you. My family failed you and my brother's memory has waited a long time for someone to say so. Destroy the box, and then, if you'll let me, I'd like you to sit at this table at dinner tonight with the family. Because that's what you are, and I've been too much a fool and too much a black to say it, and I'm saying it now." The elf looked at him with 100 years of grief and loyalty and misused love in his enormous eyes and could not speak, and instead took the cursed box in his own two hands, where no one else could safely hold it, and carried it out to the yard, and there was a sound like the world's oldest door slamming shut, and a flare of green fire that gave off no heat, and when it was over there was nothing left but a smear of ash and the silver-black arms, blackened and warped, which Creature brought back inside and set on the mantel, where Sirius left it, as a reminder and a promise. That night Creature sat at the family table for the first time in 100 years of service. On a cushion Hermione conjured him because his legs did not reach, and ate very little and said less, and watched the two children he had saved argue happily about a potions essay, and something in the ancient elf, some knot tied 100 years ago in the dark of Grimmauld Place, began at long last to come undone. The children were supposed to be asleep and were not, and Sirius knew it and let it go, because there are nights when a rule is less use than a friend. They had gone up to Harry's room, both of them, and lain on the rug under the charmed ceiling where the real stars turned, the way they had on the first Saturday 2 years before, and for a long time neither of them said anything about the box. Then Hermione said to the stars, "It was meant for me, really for me. Harry, it was addressed to both of us, but it was meant for me, because I'm the one they can't stand. You're a scandal. I'm the thing they think shouldn't exist." Her voice was very level, the level it went when she was holding something down. "Someone I've never met sat in a room somewhere and made a thing out of old cursed silver on purpose so that I would put it on and stop being me, so that there'd be no more Hermione, just them wearing me, and they wrapped it in nice paper." Harry was quiet a moment. He did not tell her it wasn't true because it was true and she would have despised him for the comfort of a lie. He said instead, "Then it's a good thing you're not going anywhere because I'd have to come and get you. Out of your own eyes, I mean, however far in they pushed you. I'd come in after you and I'd find the bit that was still you and I'd hold on to it until you came back. I wouldn't be able to do the magic, but I'd never stop looking." So it wouldn't have worked anyway, even if Creature hadn't caught it. They can make a thing that takes you over. They can't make a thing that makes me stop looking for you. There isn't one. I checked. He said the last part solemnly, the old joke between them. I checked, and beside him in the dark Hermione made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing, and turned her head and looked at him, and something that had been clenched tight in her all evening let go. "I'm frightened," she said, which she never said to anyone ever. "Not of dying, of stopping being me. That's worse. I've only just got to be me. I was me for 8 whole years where nobody wanted it, and then I finally got somewhere it was allowed, and now someone's trying to take it back." "I know," Harry said. "I'm frightened too, but we're frightened together, so it's about half each, which is the good thing about there being 2 of us." He put his hand out on the rug between them, palm up, the way you offer something without making it a whole event, and Hermione put her hand in it, and they lay under the turning stars holding hands and being frightened at about half each. And after a while, because they were 11, they fell asleep like that on the floor, and that was how Sirius found them at midnight when he came up to check, and he did not wake them, and he put a blanket over the both of them, and stood in the doorway a while in the dark, and then went back down to plan a war. And later, when the household was asleep, Sirius and Remus and Andromeda sat up late in the drawing room with the black and silver arms on the mantel between them, and worked out finally the whole shape of what they were facing. "He's not trying to win in the Wisengamot," Andromeda said. "He never was. The legal challenge was cover, something to keep us looking at the courtroom while he set up the real thing. The box was the real thing, and the box failed thanks to Creature, which means the next thing won't be subtle. He tried to take the children quietly one at a time from a distance, and it didn't work, and now he knows it won't work, and now he comes with everyone, Remus said quietly. Now it's not a curse in a box, now it's the friends Lucius kept saying he couldn't control, the ones who have been waiting 9 years for a cause. And there's a worse thing, Sirius said. He had been turning it over all evening, the cold, clear part of him, the part that had learned tactics from Moody and treachery from his own family. Hermione found it actually, not tonight, weeks ago in the old charters, and she flagged it, and I told her not to worry about it because I didn't think anyone was mad enough to use it. There's an old right, older than the right of recognition, from the worst century of the family, when houses used to make war on each other's bloodlines directly. The right of contested inheritance. He looked at the fire. If a claimant of the pure blood believes a house has been usurped by the unworthy, by heirs who shouldn't hold it, they can challenge the house itself to rejudge. But it isn't a court and it isn't words. The challenger has to come to the family seat in person with the pure blood in his own veins and seize the hearthstone and spill the blood of the contested heirs upon it and call on the old magic to choose between them. The house judges, live. In blood, and whichever claim the house rejects, his voice went flat, the house unmakes. The way it unmakes anyone it rejects in a right, the loser doesn't lose a title. The loser dies on the stone and their name burns off the wall and the winner walks away holding the whole house. The room was silent, the fire cracked. He can't perform it himself, Andromeda said slowly. Lucius, he's not of the direct blood he married in, the right wouldn't answer to him. No, Sirius agreed. But there's one person alive who is. Direct black blood of the main line, unburned of age and mad enough to spill children's blood on a stone and call it honor. He was quiet a moment. Do not trust November, Sissy wrote, 3 weeks. The contested inheritance has to be worked when the house's own defenses are lowest, and there's one night a year the wards of a black seat thin of their own accord, because that's the night the family always held its dead. The last night of the old year when the veil between the house and its ghosts wears through. It's an old custom. Most families forgot it. Ours never did. He looked at the calendar on the mantel, at the black and silver arms beside it. The last night of November, that's when he'll come. Sissy just told us the date if the note's true, and I think it is, because a lie would have told us more. He looked at his cousin, at Andromeda, whose sister they were both thinking of, and neither had said. And she's in a cell in Azkaban, which is the only thing that's been keeping this from being a great deal worse than it already is. He stood and went to the window and looked out at the dark moor where somewhere his enemies were counting their days. So here's what I need to know, and I need to know it fast, and I'm going to hate the answer. I need to know how safe that cell really is. Because Lucius Malfoy has gold enough to buy a country and friends enough to storm a fortress, and he has just spent a month teaching me exactly how far ahead he plans. And a man who plans a right that needs Bellatrix Lestrange, he turned from the window, is a man who has already worked out how to get Bellatrix Lestrange out of Azkaban. No one answered him. There was nothing to answer. Outside, the wind came off the moor and moved in the blackthorn along the western wall, the wall Hermione had left a little weak on purpose, and somewhere beyond it the last leaves of November were coming down, and the three of them sat in the firelight with the black and silver arms on the mantel between them and did the arithmetic of a war, and found when they had done it that it came out to the same answer it had come out to every time since the box arrived, which was that they would stand together in their own house and make whatever came up the hill discover that a family that has decided it will not be moved is the single most dangerous thing in the world. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The house that chose. They knew Azkaban had failed to hold her 3 days before the last night of November, because the prophet told the whole country at once, in letters 4 inches high, and because the wards of Blackthorn Hall shivered that same evening the way a horse shivers when the wolf is still a mile off but downwind. Black ESCAPES, the inescapable, the headline said, and beneath it a photograph that did not need a caption. Bellatrix Lestrange, née Black, her beautiful ruined face turned to the camera, laughing because they had photographed her the day they caught her and she had been laughing then too. The story underneath was a tangle of official evasion and obvious lies, a transfer gone wrong, a confusion of records, a guard who could not afterward account for 4 hours of his own night. It did not say what everyone in the wizarding world knew, which was that no one escapes Azkaban without a great deal of gold changing hands very quietly, and that only one family had that kind of gold and that kind of reason. Right on time, Sirius said, and put the paper down and looked around the long table at his household, at all of them, the 2 children and the werewolf and his cousin and her husband and the 2 Muggle dentists who had refused to leave and the ancient house elf on his cushion, and he did the thing he had promised himself he would do when it came, which was to tell them the truth without dressing it. She's out. Lucius bought her out, which means the right's on, which means they come here, and by everything we've worked out, they come in 3 nights on the last night of the month when the ward's thin for the dead. We've known this was coming for a month, now we know the day. He looked at each of them in turn. Anyone who wants to be somewhere else that night, I will take you there myself tonight and think no less of you and mean it. This is my family's war. It found the rest of you because you were good enough to love us. Nobody here is obliged to bleed for a quarrel 400 years older than they are. Nobody moved. Ted Tonks, who mended teeth and told card tricks and had never in his life cast a curse in anger, folded his big hands on the table and said, "Sirius, I married into this family knowing exactly what it was, and I've never once regretted it, and I'm not going to start 3 days before the best thing it ever did needs defending. Tell me where you want me to stand." And that was the end of the discussion, because once Ted had said it, there was nothing left for anyone else to say, and the whole table simply moved, without a vote, from the question of whether to the question of how. The how took 3 days, and it was Hermione's mostly, because Hermione had been building toward exactly this since the night the box came, and had a plan so complete and so cold that Moody, when he came on the second day to look it over, spent an hour going through it and then sat back and said he had nothing to add, which he had not said to a living planner in 40 years. The plan turned on the gap. "They think there's a weakness in the wards on the western wall, by the Blackthorn," Hermione explained. "On the last afternoon, the whole household gathered in the gallery under the tapestry, the hearthstone lifted, the old silver basin gleaming in the winter light. There is a weakness, I left it. I've been leaving it since October, letting it read exactly weak enough to be believed and no weaker, because a man like Lucius doesn't trust a fortress with no way in. A fortress with no way in is a trap, and he knows it, so I gave him a way in that I built myself. And a man will always walk through the door you want him to if you're careful to make him think he found it." She said it flatly, an 11-year-old laying out a killing ground, and Sirius watched Robert and Helen Granger look at their daughter with something between pride and terror, and understood the feeling exactly. They'll breach the western wall. It'll feel easy, which is how they'll know it's real, because nothing that matters is ever easy, and a clever man distrusts easy. But Bellatrix isn't clever like Lucius. She's clever like a knife. She'll take the easy way because she wants the blood, and she wants it fast. The gap opens on the west corridor. The west corridor has one destination. She pointed down the length of the gallery to the lifted hearthstone in the basin and the carved floor. "Here. The right can only be worked here on this stone because this is the heart of the house, so we don't have to defend the whole hall. We only have to defend one room. We let them in, we let them come to us, and we meet them here where the house is strongest, and they are on the oldest and most dangerous ground in Britain, and we do not let a single one of them lay a hand on that stone. And if they get to the stone anyway," Sirius said quietly because someone had to say it, "if it goes wrong, if I go down, if we're overrun, Hermione, you've thought about that too. I know you have. Tell them." Hermione's chin came up. "If they reach the stone," she said, "we let them start the rite, because the rite isn't what they think it is. They think it's a weapon that judges by blood, that the house is Tauger's purr and will side with the pure claimant and unmake us. But it doesn't judge by blood. It never has. Sirius taught us that, and the rite of recognition proved it. The house judges what you are, all the way down. And Bellatrix Lestrange is going to stand on the hearthstone of this house and demand it look into her soul and choose her over us." Her voice did not shake. "She has no idea what's down there for it to find. She thinks she's the pure one. She's the rot. She's exactly the rot the house has been throwing back into its graves for 400 years, and she's going to invoke the one rite that makes it look. So if everything else fails, if we lose, we don't lose. We just let her win her way onto the stone and let her call the judgment and let the house do the thing it has wanted to do to people like her since before the ministry existed." She looked around at all of them. "The worst case isn't that they beat us. The worst case is that we stop them before she puts her hand on the stone, because if she puts her hand on the stone and calls the rite, she doesn't walk away." There was a silence in the gallery. "You're telling me," Andromeda said slowly, "that the safest thing, if it comes to it, is to let my sister perform the rite." "I'm telling you," Hermione said gently now, because she had worked out that this was Andromeda's sister and had held it to the end out of kindness, "that your sister is going to perform the rite whether we let her or not, because it's the only way she wins, and she's mad enough and sure enough that she'll do it even standing on the wrong ground. And the house is going to answer honestly. It can't do anything else, so we fight to keep her off the stone, because I'd rather it never came to that, and because I don't want any of us hurt, and because there's always a chance I'm wrong about what the house will find. But if we can't keep her off it, Andromeda, I'm sorry, I've checked it 40 ways and it always comes out the same. If we can't keep her off it, then the kindest and the cruelest thing that will happen that night is that a 700-year-old house will look at Bellatrix Lestrange and finally tell her the truth about herself." Andromeda looked at the girl for a long moment. Then she said, "Goal is blood," in a voice gone rough, and turned away to the window, and no one made her say anything else. The last evening before it came, Sirius did a thing that surprised all of them, which was to call a halt. He stood up from the war table in the middle of the afternoon, with the plan complete and the wards set and nothing left to drill that drilling would improve, and he said that they were done, that no one was to speak of Malfoys or rights or Bellatrix again until it was over, and that they were going to spend the last evening being a family and not a garrison, because a garrison that has forgotten what it is defending fights worse, not better. And because he was not going to let the enemy take even one more evening from them than the enemy could seize by force. So they had dinner, a proper one, the long table full, Creature persuaded up onto his cushion and Robert Granger doing the exploding nut card trick badly and Ted doing it well, and Tonks, who had come for the fight and been told flatly by 4 adults at once that she was 19 and not permitted anywhere near it and had come anyway, turning her hair through the whole spectrum to make the 2 children laugh. And they did laugh. That was the thing Sirius had wanted and got, the 2 of them who would be standing on a killing floor in a matter of hours, laughing at the table until Hermione got the hiccups because he had decided that whatever tomorrow did to them, it would not find them having spent their last safe night afraid. Afterward, when the others had gone up, Sirius sat with the 2 children by the drawing-room fire, one on each side of him, the way they had sat 100 evenings, and for a while none of them said anything. "I need to tell you both something," he said at last, "and I need you to let me say all of it before you argue, Hermione, which I know is asking the impossible." She made a small offended sound and let him go on. "Tomorrow, if it goes wrong, no, let me finish. If it goes wrong and I go down, you do not stop and you do not come back for me, you hear? You get to the stone or you get out, whichever the plan says, and you keep each other alive, and you do not throw away what I've spent 10 years building by dying to drag me out of a fight. I have had 10 years I was never promised. I got to watch the 2 of you become the 2 of you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I have already won, do you understand me? I won the day I carried Harry through that door and the day Hermione walked past him to get to the bookshelf. I have already got everything I ever wanted, and nothing that happens on that floor can take it back. So you don't die for me, you live for me. That's the only order I'll ever give you that matters, promise me." They did not promise him. He should have known they would not. He had raised them too well. Harry looked at him steadily with his mother's green eyes and said, "We're not going to promise that, because it isn't true that you've already won. Because winning is all of us at breakfast the day after, that's what you said, the very large breakfast, and you don't get to change the deal now just because you're scared. We fight as one, you taught us that, you don't get to leave yourself out of the one." And Hermione on his other side took his hand and said nothing at all, which from Hermione was the loudest thing she could have said, and Sirius gave up and gathered them both in, and they sat by the fire until it burned down, and that was the last quiet hour any of them had before the dark. They came on the last night of November, in the dead hour, in the dark of the moon, and the first the house knew of it was the blackthorn. Sirius felt it in the wards, the western wall giving where Hermione had made it give, the careful wound opening, and he felt the cold come through it, the particular cold of a great many dark wizards moving together with murder agreed among them, and he stood in the gallery with his household arranged exactly where Hermione had put them and said very quietly, "They're in positions. Nobody moves early. Nobody's a hero. We are one thing tonight, and the one thing is patient." And then, because he could not help it, because he was still Sirius Black and always would be, "And when it's done, we're all having a very large breakfast, and Ted's doing the card trick with the exploding nut, and I don't want to hear that anyone was too traumatized. Is that understood?" Somebody laughed, shakily, in the dark. It helped. It was meant to. They came up the west corridor exactly as Hermione had said they would, and there were more of them than even Moody had guessed, a dozen at least, in the masks the old cause still used, and at their head, unmasked, because she had never in her life hidden her face from anything she meant to kill, came Bellatrix Lestrange. She came dancing. That was the horror of her, the thing the photographs could not carry. She moved through the dark of a house she meant to soak in children's blood like a woman coming into a party she had looked forward to for weeks, light on her feet, her ruined face lit from within, and behind her the masked wizards moved in the flat, professional silence of men who took no joy in it and would do it anyway, which was its own worse horror. And behind them all, at the very back, where a man stands who wants to be able to say afterward that he was not really there, came a figure in black with silver hair and a serpent-headed cane, who did not enter the gallery, who stood in the doorway of the west corridor where the shadows were deepest and watched. What happened then happened fast, and Sirius would spend the rest of his life assembling it out of fragments, because a fight is not a story while you are in it. It is only a series of the next half-seconds, each one arriving before you have finished the last. The gallery erupted. The household had the ground and the plan and the house itself, and for the first minutes it was enough. Remus took the left with a controlled fury that reminded Sirius the man had fought a war too. Andromeda took the right, cold and precise, and dueling her own memories as much as the masks in front of her. Moody's curses came out of the dark corners in the order of a man who had buried more dark wizards than he could name. Ted Tonks, who could not duel, did the one thing he had drilled for 3 days, which was to stand in front of Robert and Helen with the biggest shield charm Remus could teach a beginner and simply refuse to let it fall, a wall of a man being a wall. And in the center, back to back on the carved floor before the hearthstone, moved the thing that no one on the other side had planned for, because no one on the other side believed it existed, the 2 children who fought as one. Sirius had taught them and the house had bound them, and now, in the worst hour, it showed. Hermione called and Harry cast, and Hermione cast what Harry could not, and Harry moved where Hermione's mind sent him before his own caught up. and between the two of them, 11 years old, they held the center of the gallery against grown dark wizards, not because they were stronger, they were children, but because they were faster than two people had any right to be, because there was no gap between the one seeing and the others doing for an enemy to slip a curse into. Two of the masks went down in the first minute and did not get up. The old magic of the house ran warm under the children's bare feet, and where it touched them their shields held longer than they should have and their aim went truer than it should have, because the house had decided a long time ago whose side it was on and was, in its slow, enormous way, helping. For a few minutes it was the plan, working, exactly as Hermione had drawn it. The attackers came through the door in ones and twos, funneled by the west corridor onto ground where the household waited with the light behind them, and the killing floor did its work. The first mask threw raised his wand at Remus, and Remus was not where the wand pointed, had never been, and the man went down with a leg locked stiff as oak and cracked his head on the flags and lay still. Two more came for Andromeda together, and she gave ground on purpose, back and back, drawing them past the lifted hearthstone to the place Hermione had marked where the carved floor turned an ankle, and one of them turned his ankle exactly as designed, and Andromeda's curse took him before he finished falling. Ted stood his wall in front of the Grangers, and a mask threw a blasting curse at it that would have taken a lesser man's nerve. And Ted Tonks, who had never done a brave thing with a wand in his life, planted his feet and held, and the shield rang like a struck bell and held, and Robert Granger behind him picked up a fallen attacker's wand that had skittered to his feet, and having no idea how to use it, threw it hard and accurately into the corridor's dark where it would do no good, and felt better for having done something. Moody was everywhere his eye could reach, curses coming out of the shadows in the patient lethal order of a man who had been doing this since before some of the masks were born, and the children held the center. A tall mask broke through toward the stone, and Hermione saw him a half-second before he committed and said one word, left, and Harry was already moving left, his shield taking the man's curse and turning it, and Hermione's own spell went past Harry's ear into the gap the man had opened in his own guard, and the mask folded. They did not celebrate it. They had no attention to spare for celebrating anything. They turned back to back and met the next one and the one after, two children moving like one animal with four hands and one mind, and for those few minutes the whole weight of the old cause broke itself against a pair of 11-year-olds and a house that loved them, and it was not enough, and the attackers began to understand it was not enough, and that was when they stopped fighting like professionals and started fighting like cornered men. Which is to say, all at once and without order and with everything they had. But there were a dozen of them, and they were grown, and they were led by a thing that did not tire and did not fear, and slowly, curse by curse, the tide began to turn. Moody took a cutting curse across the ribs and kept fighting, and took another and went down on one knee. Andromeda was driven back from the right wall. A mask got past Remus and then another, and the careful geometry of Hermione's plan began, under the sheer weight of them, to buckle, and Bellatrix Lestrange, who had held back, who had been watching the two children in the center with a fixed and terrible curiosity, saw the buckling and understood it and came for the stone. She came for Hermione. She came laughing, low and delighted, straight through the middle of her own men, her wand up, and she did not aim at Harry, because Harry was only the Potter boy, a scandal replaceable. She aimed at the thing her whole cause could not survive the existence of, the mudblood girl the old magic had loved, and Sirius saw her coming and saw the curse already forming green and new, with the cold clarity that comes once or twice in a life, that he was too far and the children were too slow, and there was exactly one thing in the world fast enough to be between Bellatrix Lestrange and Hermione Granger in the half-second remaining, and it was him. He did not decide it. There was no time to decide it. He was simply between one half-second and the next, there in the space where the curse was going, his body flung across the last of the distance with everything he had left, and the curse that Bellatrix had shaped for a child took Sirius Black instead, full in the chest, and lifted him off his feet and threw him down across the carved floor at the foot of the hearthstone, and he did not get up. The gallery went silent on both sides for one whole second. And in that second, the two children who had been fighting as one saw the man who had raised them go down, and something happened that was not in Hermione's plan, and not in any book, and not in 700 years of the house's memory. They stopped being careful. Harry made a sound that was not a word, and Hermione made no sound at all, and the two of them turned as one from the buckling fight and knelt together at Sirius's side, and each of them put one hand on him, and each of them put the other hand, without deciding to, without knowing why, flat on the ancient hearthstone of the House of Black, and the house which had bound them as one heir and two hearts, which had loved them more than it had loved anyone in 7 centuries, which had just watched its lord fall shielding its children, woke all the way up for the first time since the world was young. It came up out of the stone the way the tide comes in, the way it had come at the right, but there was no gentleness in it now, and no ceremony. The gold light flooded the gallery, every carved name in the floor blazing at once, the whole tapestry roaring into light along the wall, and above them, through the charmed ceiling, the winter stars came out hard and furious, and the dog star burned like a wound in the sky. And the light poured up out of the stone and into the two kneeling children and did not stop, because they had asked it for everything, and it had decided to give them everything, all of it. 700 years of accumulated will and grief, and every burned name's unanswered fury, all of it channeled at once through the one heart the house trusted, the bound pair, the thing that was larger than either. They would neither of them ever have words for what it was to hold it. Harry would say only afterward that it did not feel like power, that everyone always imagined it must feel like power, and it did not. It felt like being remembered. 700 years of the dead pouring through two children at once, every burned name and every proud one. The murderers and the martyrs, the squib great-uncle who died alone in this house, and the daughter burned off the wall for loving a builder, and the son who ran to the potters, and the brother who died undoing the dark, all of them. The whole vast weight of everyone the house had ever been, arriving at the same instant in the joined hands of a Muggle-born girl and an orphaned boy, and finding there at last. After all the centuries of waiting, someone the house was not ashamed to be. Hermione said later that she had felt Gola in it, one thread among thousands, and that the thread had not been angry anymore. The gold ran up their arms and out through their linked hands and filled the gallery to the rafters and beyond the rafters, and the two of them knelt at its center and were, for one endless moment, the living voice of a dead house speaking after 7 centuries of being made to lie, and what it said, in a light too bright to look at, in a language older than any of them, was simply, "These. These are mine, I choose these." The masked wizards ran, some of them. The ones who had joined a cause for money and discovered, too late, that they had walked onto the killing floor of a living god. They turned and fled back up the west corridor, and the house let them go, because the house did not want them. The house wanted only one thing in that room, and the one thing it wanted had stopped laughing at last. Because Bellatrix Lestrange had understood, in the flood of gold, exactly what she was looking at, and instead of running, she had done the maddest and truest thing of her whole mad life. She had lunged for the stone. She had thrown herself the last few feet toward the hearthstone of the House of Black, her own blood, the pure blood, the true line, and she had slammed her hand down on the ancient stone beside the children's hands, and she had screamed into the roaring gold the words of the right of contested inheritance, the old challenge, the demand that the house look into all of them and judge, because she was certain, she was joyously and absolutely certain, that a house called Tauger's Pur would look at a mudblood and a blood traitor's ward and a woman of the direct and ancient line and choose her. The house looked. It looked at her the way it had looked at Harry at his right, the way it looked at everyone who dared it to, the whole weight of 7 centuries turning at once onto one soul and reading it all the way to the bottom, and Bellatrix Lestrange, who had demanded the judgment, got it. Sirius, on the floor, barely conscious, his chest a spreading ruin, saw the end of it, and it was the last thing he saw before the dark took him, and it was worth seeing. The house read Bellatrix, and the house found her, and there was nothing in her for it to love. It went down into her looking for the thing it had found in Harry, the plain, stubborn goodness, the true thing, the thing worth saving, and it went down and down through the pride and the cruelty and the worship of a dead monster and the pleasure she took in pain, down through everything she had made of herself in the name of a purity that had never once been real, and it reached the bottom of Bellatrix Lestrange and found, waiting there, nothing at all, no true thing, no worth. Only the rot the house had been throwing back into its graves for 400 years, concentrated at last into a single laughing point, standing on the sacred stone, demanding to be chosen, and the house rejected her. It did not strike her with lightning. It was older and stranger than that. Simply in the way it had cast out its false heirs down all the centuries and buried them and called it a death from the effort of the right, withdrew itself from her, all at once everything, the whole vast belonging of the House of Black pulling back from Bellatrix Lestrange like a tide going out forever, and where the house had been in her. Because she was of the blood, because the house had lived in every Black since birth whether they deserved it or not, where the house had been. There was now a Bellatrix-shaped absence, a nothing, a woman who had built her entire self on being of the House of Black, discovering in one endless instant that the House of Black had looked at her and did not want her, had never wanted her, would sooner give itself whole to a Muggle-born girl than keep the last drop of its own true blood if the blood was her. She had wagered her life on the house choosing her. The right took the wager. On the tapestry high on the main line, the name Bellatrix blazed once white-hot and then charred and then was gone, burned off the wall not by any living wand but by the house itself, the last thing the old magic did before it turned away from her, and Bellatrix Lestrange fell across the hearthstone she had tried to claim and did not move again, undone not by a curse but by a judgment, cast out of the only thing she had ever truly been, which was a Black. The gold light faded, the stars dimmed. The tapestry stilled, one name shorter, and in the corner where Gola's healed thread ran up beside the burned scar of Sirius's boyhood name, one name warmer. And in the sudden ordinary dark of the gallery, lit now only by the guttering lamps and the gray pre-dawn coming through the eastern windows. Harry and Hermione knelt on either side of Sirius Black, who was not moving, whose chest was a spreading dark stain, whose face had gone the color of the hearthstone, and the whole terrible machinery of the house's judgment meant nothing to either of them at all, because the man who had carried them out of the dark was dying on the floor and the house could not, for all its 700 years, do the one thing they needed. No, Hermione said, no. No, 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 serious, Harry, do something. I don't know that it's a dark curse. It's an old one. I don't know the counter. I've never. And for the first and only time in the whole long night, Hermione Granger's certainty broke, and she knelt with her hands pressed to the wound that would not close and looked at Harry with the plain, naked terror of an 11-year-old who has run out of the one thing she has always been able to rely on, which is knowing what to do. And it was Creature who saved him. The house elf came out of the shadows where he had been all night, not hiding, they would learn later, but working, moving through the battle unseen the way only a house elf can, unmaking the curses that came too near the Muggles, closing the wards behind the fleeing masks so none could double back, and he came to his fallen master and he looked at the wound with his enormous ancient eyes and he made a sound of grief and recognition. Creature knows this curse, he whispered. Creature has seen it. The old mistress's own curse, the black cabinet curse, the one that eats. There is a counter. It is old and it is cruel and it takes from the one who casts it, and Master Regulus taught it to Creature at the very end, when Master Regulus was learning all the old cruel counters, learning to undo the dark, and Creature could not save Master Regulus. The elf's voice cracked on 200 years of grief, but Creature can save Master Regulus's brother. Creature can hold him. Hold the young master's hands to his heart. The counter needs the love of the house and Creature has only servitude, but the young masters have love and the house will lend the rest. They did as he said. Harry and Hermione pressed their joined hands to Sirius's heart, and Creature laid his own small gnarled hands over theirs, and the old elf spoke a counter-curse in a language older than English, older than the family, and it cost him. They could all see it cost him, the elf aging visibly as he spoke, giving something of his own long life to close a wound the dark had opened. And the house, gentled now, its fury spent, lent the last of what was needed, the warm gold coming up soft this time. A healing and not a judgment, and beneath their joined hands the terrible spreading stain on Sirius Black's chest slowed, and stopped and began by the smallest degree to close. He did not wake, but he breathed. His chest under their hands rose and fell and rose again, ragged and shallow and alive, and Harry Potter put his face down against the man who had raised him and wept as he had not wept since he was too small to remember, and Hermione put her arms around both of them and held on, and Creature, aged and emptied and triumphant, sat back on his heels beside the master he had finally, after 100 years, not failed. He had given years of his own long life to close the wound. They could all see it in him, the new stoop, the deeper gray, the hands gone frailer than they had been an hour before. He did not seem to mind. He looked at the breathing man and the two weeping children, and he whispered to no one, to a boy 200 years dead, Creature did it, Master Regulus. Creature saved one of them this time. Creature did not fail. And whatever answered him in the warm gold light of that gallery, if anything did, it seemed to be enough, because the old elf bowed his head and was, for the first time in the memory of anyone living, content. And in the gray light of the last morning of November, the House of Black was very quiet and very warm, and for the first time in 400 years, entirely at peace with itself. They did not move Sirius for a long time, because Creature forbade it, and no one in that house would ever again argue with Creature about the old curses. They made him a bed where he lay, on the warm carved floor by the hearthstone, with the house's gold still faintly in the stones under him, and Remus knelt at his side with 2 fingers at his throat counting the slow returning pulse, and pronounced at last in a voice that shook that he would live, that the wound was closing, that the worst of it had passed. And only then did the household let itself become a set of ordinary frightened people again, and go about the small necessary business of survival. Remus bound Moody's ribs, and Moody, gray-faced and bleeding and entirely satisfied, growled that it had been the cleanest defensive action he'd seen since the last war, and that the girl who planned it had a place in the Auror office the day she came of age if she wanted it, and then passed out, which Remus said was the sensible thing to do, and rather wished he could manage himself. Ted Tonks sat down heavily against the wall he had been for an hour and discovered that his arms would not stop shaking, and Helen Granger, who mended nothing and had spent the whole battle behind his shield, came and sat beside the man who had stood between her and death and held his shaking hands in both of hers until they stilled. 2 ordinary people who had somehow ended up at the center of a war and survived it, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Robert Granger walked the length of the wrecked gallery once slowly, taking in the scorch marks in the fallen and the impossible gold-lit tapestry, and came back to his daughter, and knelt and looked at her, this small fierce child who had planned a battle and held a center and knelt now with her hands still pressed to the chest of a man she called nothing in particular and loved past all his understanding. And he said only, "You were right about all of it," and Hermione said, "I know." and put her head against her father's shoulder for exactly 3 seconds, which was all she would allow herself, and then straightened, because there was still a hand to hold. The two children would not leave him. That was the fixed point. The whole gray morning turned around. Harry on one side and Hermione on the other, each with a hand over Sirius's slow-beating heart where Creature had told them to keep it. And no one tried to move them, and no one wanted to, because it seemed to everyone in the gallery that the two small hands pressed to the man's chest were doing at least as much to keep him in the world as any healing charm, and perhaps they were. The house was still awake enough, still warm enough under them, that no one would have sworn otherwise. Dawn came up gray and then gold over the moor, real gold now, ordinary sunrise gold, through the eastern windows, and lay across the three of them on the floor, the fallen man and the two children who would not let him go, and the house held its light around them a while longer than the hour strictly allowed, because it could, and because it wanted to, and because after 700 years it had finally found something worth being gentle with. Andromeda found her sister where she had fallen across the stone. She knelt beside her a long time in the wreck of the gallery, while Remus saw to Moody's ribs and Ted got the Grangers to their feet, and the household began the slow business of counting itself and finding, against every expectation, that it was all still there. Whatever Andromeda felt, kneeling by the ruined thing that had been her sister, she kept, as she kept all the true things, to herself. But when she rose at last, she went not to Bellatrix but to the doorway of the west corridor, where the shadows had been deepest, where a figure in black with silver hair had stood all night and watched and never once raised his cane. He was gone, of course. Lucius Malfoy had left the moment the gold light came up, the moment he understood which way the house had chosen, and he would spend the coming weeks being, once again, a man whose hands were technically clean, who had merely attended, who could prove nothing and be proven nothing. But he had left one thing behind him on the floor of the corridor, dropped or placed they would never know which, a single scrap of gray paper, folded small, in a fine hand that had not been there before the battle. Andromeda picked it up. It held 4 words, the same hand as the warning, a sister writing to a sister across a ruin neither of them had been able to stop. "I am glad it chose you." Andromeda read it and folded it away with the other note, the two of them together, a warning and an absolution from a woman who had spent her whole life on the wrong side of every wall and had found, at the very end of this one terrible night, one small way to be on the right side of it. And then she went back to her family, all of it, the living crowded warm around the breathing body of the man they had all, in their different ways, refused to let the dark have, and she knelt down among them in the gray dawn light, and she was, for once, exactly where she wanted to be. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The heirs of the house Sirius Black woke on the 4th day, in his own bed, with winter sun on the counterpane and 2 children asleep in a chair too small for one of them, and the first thing he understood, before his name or the date or anything else, was that the house around him was quiet in the right way. He lay still a while and worked out the rest of it by degrees. The wound in his chest was a deep, dull ache under a great many bandages, and it had a wrongness at its center that he recognized, the signature of an old dark curse turned aside, and he understood that he had been very close to the edge and had not gone over, and that someone had paid for it. He turned his head on the pillow, which cost him more than he expected, and found the 2 children in the chair by the window, Harry folded into the corner of it and Hermione folded into Harry, both of them fast asleep in the boneless total way of children who have not let themselves sleep properly in days and have finally, in the same instant, given out. There was a book open face down on the floor where it had slid from Hermione's hand. There was a chessboard on the sill, mid-game, abandoned. There was Creature, he saw, asleep on a cushion at the foot of the bed, grayer and smaller than Sirius remembered, keeping watch even in his sleep. "You're all going to have terrible necks," Sirius said to the room, in a cracked whisper that was the most he could manage. Harry was awake before the sentence finished. He came up out of the chair so fast he nearly went over, and then he was at the bedside with his hand gripping Sirius's arm, careful of the bandages, his face doing several things at once, and Hermione, jolted awake by the loss of him, was a half-second behind, and the two of them stood over him with the particular wild relief of children who have been rehearsing quietly for days, the possibility that the answer was going to be no. "You're awake," Harry said. It came out uneven. "Remus said you would. He kept saying you would, but you didn't. For 3 days you didn't," and he could not finish it. "I'm awake," Sirius agreed. "I'm awake, and I appear to be alive, which I understand was not a given, and I have a great many questions, most of which can wait except one." He looked from one of them to the other, and he made himself ask it, because he had to know before he let himself be glad. "Is everyone else all right? All of them? Tell me the truth." "I'll know if you're managing me, Hermione. I've had 11 years of practice." "Everyone's all right," Hermione said, and her chin was steady, and he believed her. Moody cracked 3 ribs and enjoyed it enormously. Ted's arm shook for a whole day and Mum wouldn't leave him alone about it. Nobody died. Paused, the smallest one, while she decided how to say the rest. "Nobody of ours. Bellatrix, the house." She stopped. "You saw, didn't you, at the end, before you—" "I saw," Sirius said quietly. I saw it choose you, both of you. It was the last thing I saw, and I want you to know it was worth going down for to see it. The house looked at the two of you, and it looked at her, and it chose you out loud in front of everyone. He closed his eyes a moment, and it burned her off the wall itself. I felt that too. My family spent 400 years burning names off that tapestry to keep it pure, and in the end the house waited for the one moment that mattered and burned off the purest name of all, because she was the rot and it kept Gola's thread in yours. He opened his eyes. That's the whole story of this family in one night right there. Everything I ever tried to teach you, the house said it better in 10 seconds of gold. Blood was never the thing, it was never the thing. Creature woke then at the foot of the bed and saw his master awake, and made a sound Sirius had never heard from him in 30 years, and Sirius looked at the old elf, at the new gray in him, at the frailty that had not been there a week ago, and understood the rest of what had happened, and his throat closed. Creature, he said, come here, come up here where I can see you properly. The elf came trembling and climbed the bedstead, and Sirius reached out with the arm that would move and put his hand very gently on the old creature's bony shoulder, the way you touch someone you owe a debt too large to name. You saved my life, Sirius said. Hermione's already told me most of it in the note she left by the bed in case I woke while she was asleep, because of course she did. You knew the counter to the Black Cabinet curse. Regulus taught it to you. And you spent your own years to close my wound. His voice was not entirely steady. I spent my whole boyhood hating you, creature, because you were the loudest thing in a house I needed to hate, and I was wrong, and I have been trying to make up for it for years and doing it badly, and now you've gone and made it impossible for me to ever repay you, which I think you did on purpose, because you're a Black's elf, and we're all of us terrible about being in anyone's debt. He held the old creature's gaze. Thank you from the house, from me, from Regulus, who I think would be proud of you, and who I have spent too long being angry at to see clearly, and who I'd like you to tell me about properly when I'm stronger. He was learning to undo the dark. You said that in the gallery. My brother died learning to undo the dark. I'd like to know that, Regulus. Will you help me know him? And creature ancient diminished, and for the first time in 100 years entirely without bitterness, bowed his head against his master's hand and wept, and it was, everyone later agreed, the moment the last cold thing left the House of Black for good. The mending took weeks, and the household turned the weeks into a kind of long, slow festival of ordinary life, because they had all been so near to losing it that having it back felt, for a while, like a party no one wanted to end. The children read to him in shifts, Hermione working grimly through a healer's textbook so she would know the counter next time and never be caught helpless again, Harry reading the disreputable adventure novels Sirius actually preferred and doing all the voices badly. Remus brought the chessboard up and lost on purpose and was caught at it. Andromeda changed his bandages with a brisk competence that forbade any fuss, and once, when she thought he was asleep, sat by the bed a while and held her cousin's hand, which she would have denied to her dying day. Ted told him every card trick he knew twice. And Sirius lay in the sun and let them, and grew stronger by the week, and understood in the enforced stillness of it, a thing he had been too busy building the family to notice while he built it. That somewhere in the 10 years of nappies and star ceilings and air lessons and warding the moor, the broken young man who had carried a screaming baby into a house of horrors had, without ever deciding on a particular day to do it, become entirely and irreversibly happy. The world took longer to settle than the house did, but it settled, and it settled the right way, and Sirius watched most of it from a chaise by the drawing-room fire with a blanket over his knees and a fury he was too weak to act on, which turned out not to matter because the world did his work for him. The attack could not be hidden. A dozen dark wizards do not assault a noble house on the last night of November without the whole of magical Britain knowing by breakfast, and the escape of Bellatrix Lestrange 3 days before made the shape of it plain to anyone who could count. But the thing that broke the old cause was not the attack, it was the manner of its ending. Because the wards of a black seat cannot light up the way Blackthorns had lit up without every scrap of dormant black magic across the country flaring in answer, and the goblins felt it, and the ministry's instruments felt it, and Dumbledore felt it in his office and came at once. And by the time Dumbledore arrived in the grey dawn, the house had already written its testimony where no one could dispute it. Bellatrix Lestrange lay dead on the hearthstone with no curse mark on her, dead of a judgment, and her name was gone from the family tapestry, burned off by no living hand, and the old magic itself had rendered a verdict that every pureblood in Britain understood in their bones, and none of them could argue with. The House of Black, the oldest and proudest of them all, given the choice in its own ancient right between its truest blood and a Muggle-born girl, had chosen the girl and had destroyed the blood. You cannot argue with that. That was the thing the purists discovered in the cold weeks after. For 400 years their entire creed had rested on a single unspoken certainty, that the old magic belonged to the old blood, that the ancient houses and their deep power were the possession and the proof of purity. And the oldest house of all had just told them, in a language older than the ministry in front of the whole world, that they had been wrong the entire time. The magic had never been theirs. It had only ever been on the side of the true thing and had been waiting, disgusted, patient as stone, for the chance to say so. Some of them never recovered from it. A creed can survive a defeat. It cannot survive being disproved by the very thing it worshipped. Lucius Malfoy survived because Lucius always survived, but he survived smaller. There was no proving he had been in the gallery. He had stood in the deepest shadow and left the moment the light came up, and he had gold enough to buy any number of witnesses to his own absence. But there was the matter of Bellatrix's escape, which someone had funded, and the ministry, no longer afraid of the old families now that the oldest of them had publicly repudiated their creed, asked questions it would not have dared ask a month before. Lucius answered all of them and admitted nothing and paid what needed paying and kept his freedom, and lost in the losing of it the one thing he had spent his whole life accumulating, which was the assumption that he would win. He had staked everything on the house choosing blood, and the house had chosen otherwise, and everyone knew it, and a man whose great gamble has failed in public is never again quite the man he was. Sirius, who might have hunted him, chose not to and found the choosing easy, because he had learned the lesson of the whole story at last and did not need to add Lucius's ruin to it. The house had already said the only thing worth saying. Anything Sirius did to Lucius now would only be Sirius, being small, in a story that had finally taught the whole world to be large. Narcissa he never spoke of, and neither did Andromeda, but the 2 gray notes stayed folded together in Andromeda's writing desk, a warning and an absolution, and once in the spring, a single white peacock feather arrived at Blackthorn by an owl that would not stay to be questioned, and Andromeda took it out to the moor and let it go on the wind, and would not say what it meant, and was not asked. The Wisengamot confirmed the heirs in January, formally, finally, with no challenge filed against it, because no one in Britain was mad enough to challenge the 2 children the old magic had chosen in front of the world. Harry James Potter and Hermione Jean Granger, heirs of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, confirmed in law as they had been confirmed in magic, their claim now the single most unassailable inheritance in the country, warded by 700 years of the dead and a public verdict no court would ever overturn. Sirius attended in a chair, still too weak to stand for long, and heard it read, and did not gloat, though he had earned the right to gloat more than any man in the room. He only looked up at the visitors' gallery, where his 2 children sat straight-backed in their good robes exactly as they had sat for the first hearing, and let them see him look, and that was enough. Dumbledore came to Blackthorn once in the deep of that winter, ostensibly to see how Sirius mended, and truly, Sirius suspected, to see the house that had done what no living wizard could have done, and the 2 of them sat by the fire while the snow came down over the moor and talked, for the first time in years, as the friends they had never quite let themselves become. "I have been turning it over," Dumbledore said, his long hands wrapped around a cup of creature's cocoa, which he had accepted with a gravity that had made the old elf stand 3 inches taller. "What your house did, I confess it has unsettled some of my oldest assumptions, and at my age one does not welcome the unsettling of assumptions. They are load-bearing." He looked at the fire. "I have spent a long life believing that the great danger of the old magic was its coldness. That the ancient houses, the deep hereditary power, were things to be watched and contained, because such power does not love, and what does not love will always, in the end, be turned to cruelty. And then your house looked at a Muggle-born child and a dying man, and it chose them, Sirius. It chose love over its own blood, and it did so of its own ancient will, and I find I have to ask myself whether I have misunderstood the old magic for 110 years. "You haven't," Sirius said. "Not exactly. The magic was cold all those centuries, because the people holding it were cold, and it takes its shape from that. My family spent 400 years using it for cruelty and telling themselves it loved cruelty, and it let them think so the way he searched for it, the way an ill-treated animal will let you think it's vicious, because viciousness is the only thing you've ever shown it, but it was never vicious underneath, it was only waiting. That's the thing I finally understood, watching it choose them. The old magic isn't cold and it isn't warm, it's true. Reads what's actually there and it answers what's actually there. And if you give it 400 years of pure blood and empty hearts, it will look more and more disgusted every generation. And if you give it 2 children who love each other and a man who die for them, it'll pour out 7 centuries of held-back love all at once, because that's what it was for all along, and nobody had asked it for that in a very long time." He looked at the old man. "It's the same lesson as any of us, Albus. It becomes what you trust it with. My mother trusted it with her fear. I trusted it with my children. That's the whole difference. That's the only difference there ever was." Dumbledore was quiet for a while, the snow ticking at the dark windows. "You have taught me something," he said at last, "which is not a sentence I have often had cause to say, and never with less reluctance. I came here believing I had, long ago, made the correct and necessary choice in the matter of a certain child's upbringing, and consoled myself when I doubted it, that safety was worth a great deal. And I find, sitting in this warm and rather astonishing house, that I was wrong, Sirius, and that the safety I would have given him was the safety of a locked cupboard, and that you have given him instead the far more dangerous and far more necessary thing, which is a family that would burn the world down before it let him be made small. He set down the cocoa. He is happy. They both are. I have seen a great many children in a great many circumstances, and I know happy when I see it, and I have not often seen it so complete. Whatever else the old magic chose, it chose that first. It chose to let two children be happy. I think perhaps that is the truest verdict a house can render, and the rarest. The house filled up that winter and spring, in the way a house fills when it has finally decided what it is for. The Grangers came so often that Sirius gave them their own rooms in the East Wing, next to Andromeda and Ted, and Robert Granger took to spending Saturdays in the Blackthorn workshop learning, with enormous delight, to be useless at magical carpentry, and Helen and Andromeda made the kitchen garden into a thing that could have fed a village. Tonks came whenever the Auror Academy would release her, and had, to her own loud disgust, become a sort of hero to the two children after the battle they had not been allowed to let her fight in, and bore it with the grace of a 19-year-old who secretly loved it. Remus was simply permanently home, the shape of him in the library as fixed a feature of the house as the tapestry. And Creature, gray and gentle and endlessly, quietly busy, moved through all of it as what he had always in truth been and had spent 100 years being denied, which was a member of the family, and if he still muttered sometimes, it was mostly recipes now, and once memorably a lullaby over the two children asleep by the fire, in a cracked old voice that none of them had known he had. They kept Christmas at Blackthorn that year in a way the house had not seen in 400 years of keeping it grimly, and Sirius, still not strong, sat in the middle of it in his chair and let it happen around him, and did not lift a finger except to be happy. There were 12 at the table on Christmas Day, counting Creature on his cushion and Tonks changing her nose to a snout to make the crackers funnier, and Robert Granger carved the goose, and Andromeda would not let him do it wrong, and Ted did the exploding nut trick, and finally, after 3 years, got it right. And the whole long table came down in an avalanche of laughter that went up into the rafters, and stayed there with all the other laughter the house had been quietly hoarding since the first year. At the end of the evening, when the children were sent up and the grown-ups sat with their drinks, Sirius had Remus carry him. He would not admit he needed carrying, and Remus did not mention it, down the long gallery to the tapestry because he wanted to see it by candlelight on Christmas night with the house full. It hung the length of the wall, gold on green, 7 centuries of the family, and it was changed, and the changes were the whole story. Low on a branch that forked off 200 years ago, Iola Black, her name back, her thread healed, her burn closed, the daughter who chose a builder brought home at last. High on the main line, side by side, the burned scar of Sirius's own boyhood name, and stitched in living gold beside it, Sirius Black again, the house having quietly restored the sun it once cast out, because a house that has learned better does not leave its own wounds open. And in the place of honor, joined by the old rune for a thing held in common and defended as one, the two names that had cost so much and been worth every nut of it, Harry James Potter and Heirs and Hermione, heirs of the House of Black, and where Bellatrix had been, only bare green field, healing over, the weave closing the gap the way skin closes over a splinter finally drawn. Look at it, Sirius said quietly to Remus, to the candle-lit wall, to 700 years of the dead. All those centuries they spent cutting names off to keep it pure, and in the end the house sewed more back on than they ever burned, and every one of them's a name somebody chose out of love. It's fuller than it's ever been, Moony. There are more of us than there ever were, and none of it's blood. He was quiet a moment, the candle guttering. I told the tapestry that once, years ago, when Harry was small. I said I'd do it the other way round from all of them. I don't think I believed it would actually work. He looked at the healed weave a while longer. Happy Christmas, all of you, he said, to the wall, to the burned and the restored and the chosen alike. You'd have hated this. I've never been so glad of anything in my life. Sirius went up one afternoon in February when he could climb the stairs again, to the quiet room where he kept his mother's portrait. Walburga was as she always was, dark-eyed and disapproving in her frame, but she had grown very quiet in the years at Blackthorn, and quieter still since the battle, the way even a portrait might feel the house change its mind about everything she had stood for. Sirius sat down in the chair he kept there and looked at his mother's painted face for a while. "She's gone, you know," he said at last. "Bellatrix, your favorite, the house took her, judged her and found nothing and burned her off the wall itself, the way you used to burn the rest of us off, except the house did it to the one you'd have said was purest of all." He was quiet a moment. "I didn't come up here to gloat, Mother. I came up because I've finally worked out what to say to you after all these years, and it isn't a curse and it isn't a triumph. It's just this: you were wrong. Not wicked in the end so much as wrong about the one thing you built your whole life on, and you died still believing it, and that's the saddest thing I know, sadder than anything the war did to me. You had a whole house full of love available to you, and you burned it off the wall a name at a time because you were afraid of it. And I've spent 10 years turning your house into the thing you were most afraid of, a place where blood doesn't matter and love does, and it's the happiest house in Britain now, and you'd hate it, and I wish," his voice roughened, "I wish you could have seen it and been glad instead of only being able to see it and be furious. That's all, that's the whole of it. I don't hate you anymore, Mother. I just wish you'd been able to want what I've got. Goodbye." Rose, and he did not take the portrait down, and he did not curse it, and he did not slam the door. He simply went out and left his mother to her quiet, and as he closed the door behind him gently, the painted figure of Walburga Black, who had not been silent for so long in 30 years, opened her mouth as though to say something and closed it again, and looked, for the first time anyone had ever seen, not angry, only old and tired and perhaps, at the very last, a little sorry. It was as much peace as that particular wound would ever have, and Sirius, who had learned the difference between the wounds you can close and the ones you can only sit with, found that it was enough. The Hogwarts letters came in the summer, on the same July morning, 2 of them, and there was never any question that they would come, because the 2 of them had been reading 3 years above their level for years, and the quill at Hogwarts that wrote the names of magical children had been waiting for these 2 names with what Sirius liked to imagine was mounting impatience. They opened them at the breakfast table together, the way they did everything, and Hermione read hers twice, all of it including the equipment list, aloud, and had opinions about the equipment list. And Harry watched her have opinions and was happy, and Sirius sat at the head of the table with his whole strange, enormous family around him, and thought that of all the mornings of his life, this was the one he would choose to keep if he were only allowed to keep one. They went to Diagon Alley for the school things in August, the whole family, because Sirius had decided long ago that his children would not creep into the wizarding world through a side door like people with something to apologize for, and because he wanted to see with his own eyes how the world would treat them now. And the world, it turned out, had changed. 3 years before, a witch in the alley had looked at Hermione as though she were dirt, and Harry had dismantled her without raising his voice. This time the alley parted for them. People stopped in the street and stared and did not sneer, because you do not sneer at the children the oldest magic in Britain chose in front of everyone. You look at them with something closer to wonder, and a good many of the people who looked hardest, Sirius noticed, were not the old pureblood families at all, but the Muggle-borns, the shopkeepers' children, the ones who had spent their whole lives being told in 100 small ways that the deep old magic was not for the likes of them, and who now had, walking down the middle of Diagon Alley in the summer sun, proof to the contrary. In the shape of a girl with untidy brown hair who had been born to 2 dentists and chosen by the House of Black, more than one of them stood a little straighter as she passed. Hermione did not notice, because Hermione was arguing with Harry about whether they truly needed the deluxe potions kit. But Sirius noticed and kept it because that, he thought, was worth more than the whole business of lordships and rights, that somewhere in the alley that morning a Muggle-born 8-year-old was watching, and would go home believing something new about what she was allowed to become. Ollivander remembered every wand he had ever sold, which was the unsettling thing about Ollivander, and he came out from among his towering shelves and looked at the 2 of them for a long moment before he said a word. "The Black Heirs," he murmured, "both of you together, how very interesting. I have wondered, since the summer, what wands would choose the 2 of you, and I confess I have set several aside on a hunch which I do not often indulge." He measured them and muttered and pulled boxes, and the shop filled with the particular expectant hush of the place. Harry's wand found him on the 3rd try, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and the moment it settled into his hand, a warmth ran up his arm and a few gold sparks fell from the tip, and Ollivander went very still and said something under his breath that no one caught. And Hermione's found her on the 7th, vine wood and dragon heartstring, and when she took it up the whole shop seemed to lean toward her, and the lamps brightened, and a single clear note sounded somewhere in the back among the oldest boxes, and Ollivander looked at the girl born to 2 Muggles holding a wand that had chosen her out of 1,000 and said, quietly, "The wand chooses the wizard, Miss Granger. It has always chosen the wizard, and it has never once in all my years cared in the slightest for the blood in the wizard's veins. I have been telling people that for a very long time. Some of them are only now beginning to listen." And he wrapped the 2 wands with the particular care of a man who knew he had just handed 2 children something the whole country would be watching, and wished them, with an old-fashioned little bow, a most interesting 7 years. On the last night before the train, when the trunks were packed and the house was quiet, Harry and Hermione went up to Harry's room and lay on the rug under the charmed ceiling, the way they had on the first Saturday 3 years before, the way they had the night the box came, and looked up at the real stars turning slowly over the moor. "I've been thinking," Hermione said to the stars, "about houses. At Hogwarts, I mean, the sorting. They put you in one of 4 based on, well, on what you are really, which is a bit like the right when you think about it, except a hat does it instead of 700 years of the dead, which seems less thorough." She was quiet a moment. "What if we get put in different ones, Harry? What if it splits us up?" I looked it up, they take it very seriously. You sleep in different towers, you have different lessons. What if a hat decides after everything that we're two different things after all? Harry considered this with the seriousness it deserved, because everything Hermione was frightened of deserved to be taken seriously. That was the rule, that had always been the rule. Then we'll be two different things in two different towers who eat every meal together and do all their homework in the library and drive the whole school mad, he said. Hermione, the house already decided, remember. It looked at both of us and it couldn't tell where one of us stopped and the other one started, so it made us one heir instead of two. A hat's not going to undecide that. Nothing's going to undecide that. We could be in different towers or different schools or different countries and it wouldn't change the actual thing, which is that you're my. He searched for the word and did not find one big enough and used the true one anyway. You're my home. You have been since you walked past me to get to the bookshelf. Homes don't stop being your home because you sleep somewhere else. That's the whole point of them. They're the thing you come back to. Hermione was quiet for a long time. I looked up whether you can request to be sorted together, she said eventually in a smaller voice. You can't, it's not a thing. I checked. I know you checked, Harry said. You always check. It's one of my favorite things about you. He reached out on the rug between them, palm up, the old gesture, and she put her hand in his without looking because she never had to look any more. And they lay there under the turning stars, 11 years old, on the last night of the only childhood either of them would ever have, and neither of them was afraid because there were two of them, and it was still about half each. Above them, low in the south, the brightest star in the whole sky burned steady and clear, the dog star that had, if you believed a certain sort of person, been keeping an eye on Harry since before he was born, and had lately taken on the keeping of a second child besides, and had room, it seemed, for as many as the house cared to gather in. King's Cross was a crush of trolleys and steam, and the particular September grief of 100 parents pretending not to cry, and the family from Blackthorn Hall came through the barrier onto platform 9 3/4 in a great untidy procession that turned every head on the platform, because of course it did. There was Sirius Black upright now, healed, lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, in robes he had chosen specifically to be recognized in, because he had decided that the wizarding world was going to watch his two heirs board that train, and it was going to do so knowing exactly whose they were. There was Remus and Andromeda and Ted and Tonks with her hair gone Gryffindor scarlet in optimistic anticipation, and Robert and Helen Granger looking about them at the scarlet engine and the owls, and the pointed hats with the wide brave wonder of two people who had decided, 3 years ago, to follow their daughter into a world they would never fully understand and had never once regretted it. And there was Creature, who had insisted on coming, in a clean pillowcase pressed for the occasion, holding, with enormous dignity, Hermione's cat basket. The two children stood by the open door of the train with the whole platform not quite looking at them. The boy who lived and the Muggle-born girl the old magic had chosen, the two black heirs, and the not looking was full of everything the wizarding world felt about them, the awe and the resentment and the fascination, and in more hearts than the old families would ever have admitted, a strange new hope. Sirius knelt down in front of them, which he could do again now, and which he did one last time, because some things you say from down at a child's level or you do not say them right. Right, he said, you know all of it, you've read more than the 7th years. You can duel better than most of the staff, which you will not demonstrate unless someone gives you no choice, Harry, I mean it. You know who you are, and you know whose you are, and you know that this. He touched the front of each of their robes over the heart, where the small silver pin of the House of Black sat that he had given them that morning. Means you are never ever alone in any corridor, in any tower, in any trouble, because the whole house goes with you and I go with you, and the moment either of you needs me I will be on that platform so fast the barrier won't have time to close. He looked at them, his two impossible children, at the ends of the childhood he had built for them out of the ruins of his own. I have exactly one instruction, and it's the same one I've always given you, and it's the only one that's ever mattered. Stay together. Everything else you'll work out as you go. But that one thing you already know, and you knew it before I did, and the house knew it before either of you. Stay together. And there is nothing in this world or the next that can take the two of you. Hermione threw her arms around his neck, which she almost never did, and held on hard, and said something into his shoulder that no one else heard and that Sirius kept. And Harry, when it was his turn, gripped Sirius as he had gripped his collar in a ruined nursery 10 years before. The strength of the drowning turned now into the strength of the held, and said, "Thank you for not giving me to the cupboard." And Sirius, who had never told him that story, who did not know how Harry had ever come to know there had been a cupboard on offer, held on and did not ask, and understood that some things a child simply knows in his bones, the way the house knows its own. The whistle blew. They boarded, the two of them, and leaned out of the window as the great scarlet engine pulled away. And the whole untidy family ran a little way down the platform after it, the way families do. Tonks's scarlet hair and Ted's raised hand and Andromeda's rare unguarded smile and Creature lifted onto Remus's shoulders so he could see. and Sirius Black stood still at the last and watched the train carry his two heirs away into the world north, toward the school where they would become whoever they were going to be. And he was not afraid because he had done the one thing he had promised a sleeping child he would do on the worst night of his life in a house full of screaming. He had made them a home and filled it with people who chose them and taught them exactly who they were, and now he was letting them go together into a world that had learned, because of them, to be a little larger than it had been. The train rounded the bend and was gone. Above the glass roof of the station, invisible in the daylight but there, always there, the dog star held its place in the sky, and would be waiting low in the south. On the first clear night they looked up from a castle in the north and thought of home. They were, as it happened, sorted into the same house that night, both of them, to no one's surprise but Hermione's, who had run the numbers and found them unfavorable and been, for once, delighted to be wrong. But that is another story, and there were 7 years of them, and after the 7 years a great many more, because a bond the oldest magic in Britain looked at and could not tell apart does not, in the end, come apart for anything the world can throw at it, and the world tried a good deal. Many years on, when the two of them were grown, and the war that came had been fought and survived because they fought it as they had always fought everything, as one thing in two bodies, back to back, unbeatable. When Harry Potter and the woman who had walked past him to get to a bookshelf when they were 8 stood together in the long gallery at Blackthorn Hall on the evening, they came home to it for good, Sirius grey now and grinning in the doorway, Remus's chair by the fire. Creature long at rest under the blackthorn beside a stone that read simply a good ELF of a good house. The tapestry stirred where there was no draught, the way it had the night Sirius first spoke to it, and low on the heeled and crowded weave a single new gold thread lifted itself the width of a hair, and began, very slowly, in the old patient way of the house, to grow. Because the two names that had been joined by a rune for a thing held in common were about to be joined by something older still, and the house, which had waited 700 years for someone worth being gentle with, and then found two of them at once, was already, quietly, making room. Hermione saw the thread lift, because Hermione saw everything, and she took Harry's hand, the old gesture, palm to palm, no need to look, and the two of them stood under the turning charmed stars of the house that had chosen them, in the light of the family they had built, and were home, which was the only word either of them had ever really needed, and the only inheritance that had ever mattered, and the one the world had tried so hard to deny them and failed. Because a man on the worst night of his life had refused to let a child grow up in the dark, and had kept his promise every day for the rest of all their lives. Chapter 7 End.